Story 1.
My wife spent 25 years telling anyone who'd listen that cheaters were the lowest form of human garbage. She'd cut friends out of her life for staying with unfaithful partners. She made loyalty her entire identity. So when I found the emails proving she'd been sleeping with a bankrupt opiate addict she met in AA, I didn't just lose my marriage. I lost my entire understanding of reality. 2 marriages, both destroyed by infidelity. A daughter who flipped her car into a creek because she found her mother's affair before I did. A woman who mocked my deepest wounds while cackling like she'd lost her mind. And somehow, on the other side of all that wreckage, I found the one thing I never believed was possible again. I'm a tech executive in my late 50s, a musician, a woodworker. My wife is Denise. Her affair partner is Rick, a 58-year-old hotel worker she met in recovery. My daughter Ellie was 17 when her world detonated. And Catherine, you'll meet Catherine when the time is right. The first marriage taught me what betrayal felt like. The second taught me I hadn't learned a damn thing. Denise and I met when I was 30. She was beautiful, whip-smart, and had opinions that could strip paint. On our third date, she told me about her college roommate who'd taken back a cheating boyfriend. I helped her move out, Denise said, stabbing a piece of salmon with her fork. Not from his apartment, from mine. I don't keep weak people in my life. I remember thinking times, this is the safest woman on earth. Asterisk. She wasn't just loyal, she was militantly loyal. She'd built a fortress around the concept and dared anyone to breach it. We married. Had Ellie. Built 25 years of what I genuinely believed was an unassailable partnership. I played guitar on a weekend, band-built furniture in the garage, climbed the ladder at a tech firm until I was running divisions. Denise stayed home with Ellie, then got her real estate license. Then, when the drinking got bad enough that she couldn't hide it behind book club anymore, she got sober through AA. I supported every step of that. Drove her to meetings, held her hair back during the detox sweats, told her I was proud of her because I was. What I didn't know was that AA introduced her to Rick. The distance started about 8 months before I found the emails. Subtle at first, she'd come home from meetings energized but evasive, talking about her healing journey in language that felt borrowed from someone else's mouth. Then, less subtle. She started picking fights about nothing. I'd load the dishwasher wrong and get a 20-minute lecture about how I never listened. I'd ask how her day was and she'd say, "You wouldn't understand. You've never had to rebuild yourself from scratch." I thought she was processing sobriety. I gave her space. I gave her grace. She used both to build a runway. One Thursday night, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, not yet. I was looking for a recipe she'd bookmarked, but the browser had her email open and the preview pane showed a message from a name I didn't recognize. Rick. The email was short. Familiar. The kind of short and familiar that doesn't exist between strangers. I scrolled down and my hands went cold. Not explicit, not in that thread, but intimate in a way that was worse. Inside jokes, pet names. A reference to last Tuesday that made my stomach fold in half because last Tuesday, she'd told me she was at a women's meeting. I made my first critical mistake. I told her what I'd found. The moment the words left my mouth, I watched her face cycle through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Shock, calculation, performance. Then the tears came perfectly timed. We kissed once, at a meeting. It was awful and I felt sick and I ended it immediately. She grabbed my hands. She looked me dead in the eyes with a sincerity so convincing I felt guilty for doubting her. "You're the only man I've ever loved. Rick is a broken person and I was trying to help him and it went too far for 1 second and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." We spent the weekend in what I now call the false reconciliation. Long talks, crying, lovemaking that felt desperate and performative in a way I couldn't name at the time. She said everything right. She always knew what right sounded like, but something gnawed at me. A phrase from one of the emails, time, same room times. You don't write that about a single kiss. The following Monday while she was at work, I found her old phone in a drawer. She'd factory reset it, but she'd backed up her photos to the cloud and forgotten about the text message archive synced to her tablet. I sat in my workshop sawdust still on my jeans and read 6 months of messages between my wife and a 58-year-old bankrupt opiate addict who worked the front desk of a Comfort Inn. Explicit, detailed, logistical. They had a room. They had a schedule. They had a shorthand for when I was traveling for work. She'd text a single musical note emoji and he'd confirm with a clock. I set the tablet down on my workbench and stared at the wall for what might have been 40 minutes. My hands didn't shake. That's what scared me. I felt like someone had scooped out my chest cavity and replaced it with concrete. When I confronted her with the evidence, the one kiss story evaporated. She cried differently this time, ugly, panicked, real. I told her I was giving her a gift, one chance at reconciliation. Full transparency, full accountability. We'd do the work. She agreed to everything. What neither of us knew was that Ellie had found those same emails weeks before I did. My 17-year-old daughter had been carrying her mother's secret like a grenade with the pin pulled, and nobody heard the explosion until she was upside down in her car, in a creek bed, blood alcohol, twice the legal limit, expelled from National Honor Society pills in her backpack that didn't belong to her. And when Denise found out that Ellie knew, when Ellie screamed at her mother that she was a liar and a hypocrite, and everything she'd ever taught her was garbage, Denise looked at our daughter and said the words that still make my jaw tighten 7 years later. "You are the reason I want to drink." Then she got in her car and peeled out of the driveway so fast the tires left marks on the concrete. Ellie called me sobbing, convinced her mother was going to kill herself, convinced it would be her fault. That's when the inversion happened. Ellie couldn't be angry at Denise. Anger might kill her. So Ellie turned all of it on me, the safe parent, the one who wouldn't self-destruct. Denise let it happen, encouraged it. She started monitoring my posts on an online support forum, feeding details to Ellie, out of context, whispering that Dad was airing family business to strangers. One night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded her hands like a therapist, and said, "I've forgiven myself. I think you need to respect that." I stared at her. She stared back, waiting for applause. I gave her a year. 12 months of couples therapy, individual therapy, books, workshops, the whole architecture of reconciliation. I did the work because I loved someone so much it was hard to believe she could ever do the unimaginable. And for 12 months, I waited for her to meet me halfway. Instead, on a Tuesday night in November, she met me at the bottom. We'd been arguing about nothing, a credit card charge maybe, or something equally small. The kind of argument that was never about the thing. It was about, I was standing in the kitchen doorway and she was sitting at the table with a glass of sparkling water, and somewhere in the middle of my sentence, she started laughing. Not real laughter, something else. "You want to know what's funny?" she said, and her voice had a quality I'd never heard before, high, brittle, theatrical. "You, walking around this house like some wounded saint. You, with your little forum posts and your therapist and your..." She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead in a mock swoon. "Oh, times Denise hurt me. Denise broke my trust. I gave her everything and she, asterisk..." She was imitating me. Not generically, specifically. She was using the exact words I'd said in our couple sessions, the exact cadence of things I'd whispered in bed at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, the precise inflection of my voice when it cracked during our worst conversations. She'd cataloged every moment of vulnerability I'd ever shown her, and she was performing them back to me like a one-woman show. Then came the fake tears. She scrunched her face, made exaggerated sobbing sounds, and actually cackled, head thrown back at the impression. "Do you hear yourself? Do you know what you sound like? You sound like a Times child. Asterisk." My hands were flat on the counter. I remember the grain of the wood under my palms. I remember the hum of the refrigerator. I remember the specific quality of silence inside my own skull when something fundamental rearranges itself. 25 years. Every fear I'd ever confessed, every wound I'd let her see, every night I'd chosen to be soft with her instead of guarded. She'd stored it all. And now she was using it like ammunition. Not because she was angry, but because my pain made her feel powerful. And feeling powerful was easier than feeling ashamed. I looked at her. She was still laughing, but her eyes were watching me the way a person watches when they know they've gone too far and can't stop. "I'm done," I said. Not loud, not dramatic. The quietest sentence I've ever spoken. She stopped laughing. "The divorce cost me $200, 000. I bought out her share of the house and pension because I wanted clean. I wanted surgical. My attorney told me I was overpaying. I said I didn't care. What saved me from financial ruin was absurd. Denise's own appraiser undervalued the house by several $100,000. A professional mistake that amounted to the universe's only act of mercy in the entire process. I signed the papers, wrote the check, and sat alone in a house that smelled like sawdust and 25 years of someone else's perfume. Ellie didn't speak to me for 4 months after the divorce was finalized. Denise had spent those months whispering, not screaming, never screaming, because screaming would have been too obvious. Whispering that I'd abandoned the family, that I'd chosen my pride over her recovery, that a real man would have stayed. I never once told Ellie what her mother had said to me that Tuesday in November. I never told her about the cackling, the mockery, the performance. I just waited. I want to provide a hopeful story to those who need hope. My 2 marriages ended in spousal infidelity, both with kids involved. It was horrible both times. First time after 7 years together, the second after 25. I didn't think I could ever trust again. After lots of therapy, I realized my picker was broken. I was picking women who were beautiful, smart, but ultimately narcissistic, much like my father was. I did a lot of self-reflection and re-entered the dating scene prematurely, but I'm in my 60s and I wanted to have an experience with a woman that was not haunted by the last one. Catherine was someone I'd known peripherally for years, a friend of a friend from the old couple's dinner days. Ivy League education played cello had her own betrayal story that she carried with the quiet dignity of someone who'd done the work and didn't need to perform having done the work. We reconnected at a mutual friend's birthday party. She asked me how I was doing and I said better, and she nodded like she knew exactly what that word cost. We've been together for years now. We have never had a fight. Not because we avoid conflict, because she doesn't weaponize intimacy. She disagrees with me the way an adult disagrees with another adult. The first time she said, "I think you're wrong about that," without any edge, without any cruelty, without storing it for later use, I almost cried at the dinner table. Ellie graduated from a competitive college in New York City. She rebuilt her relationship with me slowly, brick by brick, and one evening over dinner she said, "I respect that you never badmouthed Mom. My throat closed." I just nodded. 7 years after D-Day, Denise showed up at my house to pick up old family videotapes. She stood on the porch looking nervous, heavier, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. She said she was sorry. She said she went crazy and ruined everything. She said she understood if I hated her, I didn't hate her. That's what surprised me. I searched for the anger the way you pat your pockets for your keys and it simply wasn't there. I nodded. I gave her the tapes. I wished her well and I meant it. Catherine and I married in our front yard. My 3 grandsons were the flower boys. The 2 oldest scattered petals with enormous seriousness. The youngest, 2 years old, faced like a biscuit, wandered off halfway down the aisle to play with Grandpa's woodworking scraps piled by the garage. Everyone laughed. Catherine squeezed my hand. I used to think the goal was forgiveness. It isn't. The goal is the ability to trust again. Not the same person. Not the same way. But to stand in front of someone and say, "Times here is every soft thing about me times," and actually believe in your bones that they won't use it to destroy you, that's the whole thing. That's everything.
Story 2.
I saved every spare dollar for 7 years to take the trip of a lifetime, and my family thinks that money belongs to someone who already secretly burned through thousands she never paid back. When I finally said no, I thought the worst was over until I got a call from halfway across the world that she'd broken into my house, trashed everything I owned, and was sitting in my living room refusing to leave. The cops found something else in her car that night that made everything 10 times worse. So let me break this down for you. I'm a 25-year-old guy. My dad is Henrik, my mom is Selim, and my younger brother Jonas is 19. My uncle Dawid is 39. And then there's my Aunt Meseret. She's 32, and she is the reason I'm telling you this story right now. Let me take you back to where this all started. When I was 18, I made a promise to myself. I just graduated high school, working part-time in a warehouse, and I saw this documentary about the Swiss Alps. Something about the way the light hit those mountains made my chest ache. I told myself times, one day, I'm going to stand there. Asterisk. Not on a screen, not in a photo. In person, breathing that air. So I started saving. Every spare dollar, every overtime shift, every birthday check that could have gone to sneakers or nights out. I opened a separate account and I didn't touch it. Not when my car broke down, not when my buddies went to Vegas, not when inflation made everything feel pointless. 7 years. 7 years of discipline that most people my age don't have, and honestly, I barely had it either. But I held on. By 25, I'd done something else too. I'd finished my master's degree, fully funded through assistantships and scholarships I'd clawed my way into, and I'd paid off my house. Yeah, my house. Small, nothing fancy, but mine. The mortgage was gone. I was free in a way that felt almost illegal. Then the project I was working on wrapped up in late May instead of July like we thought it would, and suddenly I had this window. I started planning the vacation. Europe, Switzerland, Germany, France, England. 6 weeks. The trip I'd been building towards since I was a teenager, staring at mountains on a laptop screen. That's when Meseret called my mom. She needed money for her semester. She'd enrolled in some program. I honestly stopped keeping track of which one, and she was short. Not a little short. She needed thousands. And because I'd made the mistake of mentioning my trip in the family WhatsApp group because I'd been excited times for the first time in years and wanted to share that with people I loved, everyone suddenly knew I had cash. The first call came from Mom. "She's your aunt," Salam said, her voice carrying that specific frequency she uses when she's already decided you're wrong. "She's family. You can take your trip next year. I've been planning this for 7 years, Mom, and she's been trying to get her degree for..." That's kind of the point, isn't it? Silence. The disappointed kind. Then the messages started. Cousins I hadn't heard from in months. An uncle in Dallas who still owed my dad money from 2019. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone thought I should help. Nobody offered a single dollar themselves. One message from a cousin I'll never forget times, you're really going to go play tourist in Europe while your own blood can't afford school? That's cold, bro. Asterisk. I typed back, times, how much did you send her? Asterisk. He never replied. My dad Hennick was quiet through all of this, unusually quiet. He'd just nod when mom brought it up at dinner, chew his food slowly, and change the subject. I assumed he was staying neutral. I was wrong. It was Dawit who broke the silence. I drove to his place on a Saturday, mostly to vent. Dawit's always been the uncle I could talk to, straightforward, no games. But when I walked in and started explaining the pressure, something shifted in his face. He set his coffee down, rubbed his jaw, looked at the wall like he was doing math on whether to speak. Sit down, he said. I am sitting. Then stay sitting. He leaned forward. Your dad gave Messeret money 4 years ago. For school. Same story. She was enrolled. She was short. She needed help. He gave her close to $3,000. My stomach dropped. She dropped out after 1 semester. Never paid him back. Not a dollar. Not a word about it. Why didn't he? Because she's his sister. And because I told him not to make it a thing. Dawit's voice got tight. Because I did the same thing. She came to me before your dad. I gave her $2,000. Same promises. Same result. She dropped out, disappeared for 6 months, came back like nothing happened. I sat there doing the math. $5,000 between them. Gone. Buried. And now she was back at the well, and the bucket she was lowering had times my name on it. Asterisk. Why didn't anyone tell me this? We were protecting her. He said it flat like he'd already judged himself for it. Sibling loyalty. Stupid maybe, but that's what it was. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from anger, from clarity. The kind that burns. I called Messeret that night. Told her no. She cried. She accused me of not caring about family. I told her I knew about the money. The line went dead. Then I opened the family WhatsApp group and I burned it to the ground. Every person who'd pressured me, I called out by name. Every cousin who shamed me without contributing a cent. Every relative who treated my savings like a communal fund. I told them the truth about the money Messeret had already taken and never returned. I told them if family meant so much, they could pool their own cash. Then I muted the chat, packed my bags, and chose my brother Jonas to watch the house. He could live there free of charge as long as he took care of the place, and I trusted him completely. 2 weeks later, I was standing in Munich, breathing foreign air, finally living the thing I'd spent 7 years building toward. That's when my phone lit up with a WhatsApp call from Jonas, and his voice was shaking. She's in your house. Jonas's voice was thin. Not scared exactly, more like someone trying to describe something they haven't fully processed yet. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, stepping away from the Marienplatz crowd into a side street where the noise dimmed. What do you mean she's in my house? I went out to get food. 20 minutes, maybe less? When I came back, Messeret's car was parked next to the house. The frame was cracked, man. She broke it open. My legs did something strange. They locked. I was standing on a cobblestone street in Munich, 6,000 miles from home, and my body was trying to physically root itself to the ground like that would help. When I walked in, she was going through your stuff. The living room was. He stopped, swallowed. Your TV is gone, like destroyed. She smashed it. The PS5 is in pieces. Your gaming PC, I think she threw it. The collection. I didn't ask about the collection. I couldn't. She didn't know I was living there, Jonas continued. She thought the house was empty. When she saw me, she just started screaming that you owed her, that you ruined her life, that she had every right to. Is she still there? She won't leave. She's sitting on your couch telling me she's not going anywhere until she talks to you. I already called the police. I closed my eyes. Munich disappeared. The street noise, the church bells, the tourists, all of it collapsed into a single point of white-hot focus. 7 years of saving. A house I'd paid off with my own hands. And this woman was sitting in it, surrounded by wreckage, because I told her no. Don't engage with her, I said. Stay outside. Wait for the cops. Already outside. Good. My voice was steady. I don't know how. Call Dad. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I sat on a bench near the Isar River, refreshing my phone like a heartbeat monitor. Jonas texted updates in fragments. Asterisk. Police. Here. Asterisk. Asterisk. She's arguing with them. Asterisk. Asterisk. She's saying she's family and has a right to be here. Asterisk. Asterisk. They're not buying it. Asterisk. Asterisk. They found weed in her car. Asterisk. Asterisk. A lot of weed. Asterisk. Asterisk. They're arresting her. Asterisk. That last message sat on my screen for a long time. I read it maybe 15 times. Each time, it meant something slightly different. Relief? Vindication? Grief? Then just a flat, heavy nothing. Hinnock called me an hour later. His voice was the calmest thing I'd heard all day, which meant he was furious. She destroyed your television, your PlayStation, your computer. Jonas says she went through your game collection too. Cases everywhere, discs snapped. A pause. Some of those you can't replace. I know. The police found illegal marijuana in her vehicle. Not a small amount. She's being charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and possession. I pressed my palm against my forehead. She really did all this because I wouldn't give her my money while I'm still outside of the country. She did all this because she's never heard the word no and meant it. The trial happened 3 months later. I was in Paris by then. I'd refused to cut the trip short, and my attorney said a Zoom appearance would be sufficient. So I sat in a rented apartment near Montmartre with my laptop open watching Narrated on a screen for the second time in my life, where she couldn't hang up on me. Her lawyer tried everything. A manic episode, emotional distress caused by family conflict, cannabis-induced impaired judgment. He actually used the phrase, cry for help, with a straight face, and I watched the judge's expression flatten into something between boredom and contempt. The prosecution laid out the damage, the broken door frame, the shattered 65-inch TV, the PS5 reduced to plastic shrapnel, the custom gaming PC I built over 2 years and 43 games, some collectors, editions, some out of print, some irreplaceable. Total damages assessed at $8,200. Narrated cried on the stand. Real tears, probably. But the judge had seen the photos, had read Jonas's statement, had reviewed the police report detailing the quantity of weed found in her car, the same car, by the way, that she apparently could afford to own and maintain while claiming she couldn't pay for school. 3 years, and $8 200 inches restitution. Her car was seized. Her possessions were liquidated. I collected every dollar. The family split exactly the way you'd expect. The people close enough to know the full story, Hinnock, Selim, Dawit, Jonas, closed ranks. Mom had gone quiet long before the trial. She never apologized directly, but she stopped bringing up Narrated entirely, which from Selim was the same thing. The extended family was a different animal. Cousins who hadn't contributed a cent to Narrated's education suddenly had passionate opinions about how I'd put family in jail. The WhatsApp group I'd torched months ago apparently reconstituted without me, and the consensus was that I was cold, selfish, and vindictive. I blocked every hostile number, didn't argue, didn't defend myself, just blocked and moved on. There's a specific freedom in realizing that people who only value you as a resource will never understand you as a person. I'm writing this from a hotel in London. Tomorrow I'm taking the train to Edinburgh. Next week, Switzerland. The Alps. The thing that started all of this when I was 18 years old watching light hit mountains on a screen. My chest doesn't ache anymore. It's just open. And the air wherever I am belongs to me.
Story 3.
My mother-in-law told me I disgraced her family's genetics by existing. At her husband's birthday party, in front of 40 relatives, while standing in a house I paid for. So here's the situation. My in-laws worship beauty like a religion, and I was their heresy. They lived rent-free in a home I bought, mocked me daily for my appearance, and when I finally asked for basic respect, they chose homelessness over apologizing. Then their golden child daughter dumped them in a care facility, and suddenly the ugly daughter-in-law was the only phone number worth dialing. I'm 31 female and apparently not pretty enough to deserve gratitude. My husband is Lior, 31, the only one in his family who sees people instead of faces. His mother is Vivian, 61, a woman who weaponized beauty her entire life. His father, Gerald, 65, enabled every cruel word. And his sister, Nadine, 34, played the devoted daughter right up until devotion got inconvenient. The thing about marrying into the Ashford family is that nobody warns you. The audition never ends. I met Lior at a hospital fundraiser. I was there because I had organized it. He was there because his company had donated imaging equipment. He asked me to dinner that night, and I said yes, because he looked at me like I was already enough. I didn't know then that his family operated on an entirely different metric. Vivienne had been a catalog model in the 80s, not famous regional. Department store circulars, the occasional magazine spread for a mid-tier jewelry brand. But she'd built an identity around it that calcified into doctrine. Beauty was virtue. Beauty was proof of worth. She passed this gospel to Nadine, who inherited her mother's cheekbones and wielded them like credentials, and to Lior, who quietly rejected it and never told anyone why. The first time I met Vivienne, she held my face between her manicured fingers and turned it side to side like she was inspecting fruit at a market. Interesting bone structure, she said, which I later learned was the most generous thing she'd ever say about me. We married small. Vivienne wore black. The house situation started 2 years before Gerald's birthday party. Lior and I had been married for a year when his parents' financial situation collapsed. Gerald's investment portfolio imploded bad bets on speculative real estate, compounded by pride that prevented him from pulling out early. They were about to lose their home. Vivienne called Lior sobbing, and Lior called me. Here's what people don't understand. I didn't help because I was naive. I helped because my own parents taught me that family means showing up even when it costs you. My father had worked 32 years in municipal water management, so my mother could stay home with my disabled brother. Sacrifice wasn't abstract to me. It was Tuesday. I had savings, substantial savings earmarked for my parents' retirement care. I redirected 85% of it toward the EMI on a house in Vivienne and Gerald's neighborhood, a house Lior had been about to sell because he couldn't carry the payments alone. I covered it. We transferred ownership to my name because that was the legal reality of who was paying. And then we moved his parents in, rent-free, no questions asked. For 3 years, I said nothing. Not when Vivienne rearranged the furniture I'd chosen and told guests it was her home. Not when Gerald referred to me as Lior's wife instead of my name at family dinners, as if naming me would make my presence too real. Not when Nadine visited every other Sunday and the three of them would sit in the living room speaking French, a language I don't speak, while I prepared food in the kitchen. I said nothing because I believed grace was cumulative, that eventually the sheer weight of my kindness would crack something open in them. I was wrong. Gerald's 65th birthday. 42 relatives packed into the house. My house and Vivienne had spent 3 weeks planning it like a state dinner. I'd funded the catering. I'd taken 2 days off work to help set up. I was carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres through the living room when I heard my name. Not my name. What Vivienne called me when she thought I couldn't hear. That weird-looking girl has disgraced this family's genetics just by existing. Look at her. Look at my son. People ask me if she's his time's assistant, asterisk. Laughter. Not all 42 relatives. But enough. I stopped walking. The tray trembled in my hands. Vivienne saw me and didn't flinch. She time-straightened, asterisk. Oh, good, you heard. Maybe now you'll understand why I keep asking Lior to reconsider. The room went silent. I set the tray down on the nearest table with a steadiness that surprised even me, and I walked out. Not dramatically. Not crying. I just left. I sat in my car for 40 minutes and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. That night, I told Lior I wanted the house back. He didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. He called a family meeting the following weekend and laid it out, apologized to my wife, or vacate her property. Gerald intervened first. You don't have to be her puppet for that. You married her, and now she is doing her duty. Don't put her on a pedestal. Lior snapped. His voice cracked with something I'd never heard from him. Not anger exactly, but the sound of a man realizing his father had never once seen him clearly. I times respect times her for everything, and you should also respect her because she has let you live in her house for the last 3 years and never said a word. The silence that followed was surgical. They were shocked to know the house was mine. Lior told them the truth, that he'd been about to sell when I saved it, paid for 85% of the EMI, and that he'd transferred ownership to my name because it was the right thing to do. They didn't apologize. They didn't even blink toward remorse. Lior asked them directly. Apologize to her. Vivienne's lip curled. A times simp, asterisk. My own son, a simp. It was her duty to help her husband at bad times. That's what wives do. That's not charity. That's obligation. Gerald nodded. Nadine on speakerphone said nothing, which was its own kind of vote. Then leave, Lior said quietly. And they did. Vivienne packed 3 suitcases, Gerald loaded them into Nadine's car, and they drove away from a house they didn't own, toward a daughter whose devotion had an expiration date they couldn't yet read. 2 weeks of silence followed. Then, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The front window of the living room. A brick wrapped in a page torn from one of Vivienne's old modeling composites her face at 23 jaw, tilted eyes full of a confidence that had curdled into cruelty over 40 years. No note. None was needed. Lior found me standing in the hallway in bare feet glass, glittering across the hardwood like scattered teeth. He pulled me back before I stepped forward. Don't move, he said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had just understood something final. The police came. Filed a report. Insufficient evidence, they said, though. The composite page told its own story. 2 nights later, my father, who had been staying with us while we prepared his room, found Gerald standing on the sidewalk at dusk, staring at the house. Not approaching. Just standing. My father, 71 years old with a replaced hip and a heart condition, went outside to ask if he needed something. Gerald told him his daughter had married above her station and that the house would come back to the Ashfords one way or another. My father came inside and sat down at the kitchen table and didn't speak for an hour. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet and he said, "I didn't raise you to be treated like this." That sentence broke something in me that Vivian's public humiliation hadn't, because my father had never once complained. Not when he worked double shifts, not when my brother's care costs consumed every vacation they might have taken. He had absorbed difficulty like soil absorbs rain, quietly, completely. And now, this man who had earned every ounce of peace I was trying to give him was being terrorized on a sidewalk by someone whose mortgage I had paid. I filed for the restraining order the next morning. The renovation took 3 months. I gutted the bathroom on the ground floor and rebuilt it with grab bars, a walk-in shower, a seat. I widened the door frames. I installed a ramp at the side entrance. Every modification was a sentence in a language Vivian would never understand. Times, "This is what love looks like when it isn't performed for an audience." Asterisk. My father moved in on a Saturday. He stood in the doorway of his room and touched the wall like he was confirming it was real. "This is mine," he asked. "This is yours." He unpacked a single framed photo of my mother, gone 4 years now, and set it on the nightstand, and that was enough. That was the whole ceremony. Lior severed contact with his parents formally, not through a dramatic phone call, through a letter handwritten 3 paragraphs long. I didn't read it. He didn't offer, but when he sealed the envelope, his hands were steady and his jaw was set in a way that told me the decision had been made long before the pen touched paper. The boy who had quietly rejected his mother's gospel of beauty had finally said so out loud. A year passed. I learned what happened next, not from Lior, not from Vivienne or Gerald, but from a cousin of Lior's named Mark, who called one evening with the careful tone people use when delivering news they find both terrible and inevitable. Nadine had moved her parents into Cedarbrook Assisted Living. Not gradually, not after a medical event. She'd simply informed them one morning that the arrangement wasn't working. Her boyfriend didn't like the tension, her apartment was too small, their presence was affecting her energy. She drove them to the facility, signed the intake paperwork, and left before lunch. Mark said Gerald had stood in the lobby holding his suitcase looking at the door Nadine had walked through and hadn't moved for 15 minutes. I set the phone down after the call and sat with the information. I expected to feel vindicated. I searched for it, that hot, righteous bloom of times I told you so, asterisk. It wasn't there. What I felt instead was a dull, familiar ache. The same ache I'd felt carrying that tray through the living room. The same ache I'd felt sitting in my car for 40 minutes. Not anger. Grief for people who couldn't stop destroying the bridges they stood on. Lior took it harder. He didn't cry. He went for a run at 10 o'clock at night and came back an hour later and stood in the shower until the water went cold. I didn't ask. I just left a towel on the hook in the hallway light on. Mark told me one more thing. Vivienne in the facility had been heard telling another resident that her son had been stolen by an ugly woman who tricked him and brought him to the streets, that the house had been taken from them, that they were victims of ingratitude. She was still performing, still curating the narrative. Even in a room she didn't choose surrounded by bodies that time, was softening and folding and diminishing the very process she'd spent a lifetime treating as moral failure she could not stop. Gerald, Mark said, mostly sat by the window. I asked Mark if they'd ever mentioned apologizing. He went quiet long enough that I knew the answer. No, he said, not once. I thanked him and hung up. That night I checked on my father. He was asleep in his accessible room in the house I'd paid for under a roof that nobody would take from him. My mother's photo watched from the nightstand. The grab bars gleamed faintly in the hallway light. I closed his door gently and stood there for a moment, my hand still on the knob. The Ashfords had worshipped beauty like it was a savings account, something that would compound and protect them. But beauty doesn't compound. It spends. And when it's gone, what's left is only what you built with your hands and your choices and your willingness to love people who couldn't love you back. I had built this. They had built Cedarbrook. And the ugliest thing in the whole story was that they would never ever see it.
Story 4.
The one responsible thing my wife did after cheating on me became the exact thing that ended our marriage. She got an STD test to protect me, and that single act of conscience was the receipt I never asked for but couldn't unsee. So here's what happened. My wife went to Vegas for a friend's bachelorette week, came back a different person, and I found a hospital bill for an STD screening hidden in her purse. She confessed everything. And I made her believe that confessing to our families would save us, but what she didn't know was that I already had divorce papers in my back pocket. The confession wasn't reconciliation. It was sentencing. I'm 37 male. My wife is Dove, also 37, 16 years together, gone. Priya is the bride whose bachelorette party started all of this. Arjun is my divorce lawyer, an old school junior. And Neil is my best friend who let me crash at his place, recently divorced himself, so he knew the drill. Dove and I met when we were 21. College sweethearts, the kind people point to at weddings and say, times see it does happen, asterisk. 16 years. A son. A house with a garden she designed herself, every plant chosen because it meant something. Jasmine for devotion. Lavender for calm. I used to joke that our backyard was a love letter I couldn't read. I need you to understand that before I tell you what she did. The Vegas trip was Priya's idea. Priya, who I'd met exactly twice, and both times left the conversation feeling like I'd been assessed and dismissed. She was Dove's school friend, the kind of friend who resurfaces every few years with an energy that rearranges the furniture in your wife's personality. When Dove told me it was a full week in Vegas for Priya's bachelorette, I raised an eyebrow. 1 week seemed excessive. Dove laughed and said Priya doesn't do anything small. I said fine. I trusted her. That's not a figure of speech. I trusted Dove the way you trust the ground beneath your feet. You don't think about it. You just walk. She flew out on a Saturday. The first 2 days, normal texts. Photos of the group at dinner at the pool, matching robes. Day 3, the texts got shorter. Day 4, she called me at midnight, voice thick, and said she missed me. Something in the way she said it made my chest tighten, but I told myself it was wine and distance. Day 5, almost nothing. Day 6, a single heart emoji at 11 p.m. Day 7, she came home. I picked her up at the airport. She hugged me like she was trying to climb inside my ribcage, and then she pulled away too fast. In the car, she stared out the window. I asked about the trip. She said it was fun. I asked about Priya. She said Priya was happy. I asked if something was wrong. She said she was just tired. That night, I reached for her in bed. She flinched. Actually flinched. Her shoulder jerked away from my hand like I'd touched a burn. She apologized immediately, said her back was sore from the flight. I let it go. 3 days passed. She moved through the house like a ghost, wearing my wife's clothes. Cooked dinner but didn't eat. Played with our son, but her laughter had a half-second delay, like she was translating from a language she'd forgotten. She showered twice a day, long showers, door locked, which she'd never done. And she wouldn't look at me. Not really. Her eyes would land somewhere near my face and slide off like I was too bright to stare at directly. On the 4th day, I found it. I wasn't snooping. I want that on the record. She'd asked me to grab her wallet from her purse because the delivery guy was at the door. I opened the bag, moved aside, a makeup pouch, and there it was. A folded hospital bill from a clinic 15 minutes from our house. STD panel. Comprehensive. Booked. The day after she landed. My hands went still. The delivery guy rang the bell again. I stood in our hallway holding that piece of paper, and the house went completely silent inside my skull, like someone had pulled a plug. I paid for the food. I put the bill back exactly where I found it. I ate dinner across from her and tasted nothing. That night, I lay beside her and stared at the ceiling for 6 hours straight. The next morning, I started looking. Her phone, nothing. She'd wiped it clean, which was itself a confession. Her Instagram DMs, nothing. Her call log, nothing except a 40-minute call to Priya the night she came back. I checked our shared credit card. Normal charges, restaurants, a spa, a club. Nothing that screamed infidelity, but the STD test screamed it. One piece of evidence sitting alone in a field of silence louder than 100 texts could have been. I went online. I read forums, threads, stories from men who'd found exactly what I found. The pattern was surgical in its consistency, the distance, the flinching, the excessive showering, the phone wipe. I wasn't special. I wasn't an exception. I was a statistic. By the 5th night, I couldn't carry it anymore. We were at the dinner table. Our son was at my mother's for the evening. Dove was pushing rice around her plate, and I watched her hand tremble just slightly, just enough, and I felt something in me snap clean through. How was your STD test? 4 words. Her fork stopped midair. The color left her face in a wave top to bottom like watching a tide go out. She didn't ask times, "What are you talking about, asterisk?" She didn't deny it. She set the fork down with a precision that told me she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for days. And then she told me everything. The bachelorette group went to a male strip club. Priya's idea. Things escalated. Private rooms. An intimate massage that Dove swore she tried to stop, but didn't. And then because she told herself the line was already crossed, she didn't stop what came after either. One night, one man. She said his name and I held up my hand because I physically could not hear it. She was sobbing. Shaking. She said Priya had pressured everyone that she'd been drinking, that she hated herself, that getting the test was the first thing she did because she couldn't bear the thought of hurting me that way too. I sat there, very still. And behind the devastation, something cold and architectural was already forming in my mind. The next evening, Arjun, my old school junior, now a divorce lawyer, asked me to meet for a drink. So the last evening, Dove confessed her cheating, and the next evening, I was sitting with my lawyer and discussing my divorce. He asked me to sleep over my decision and see if the emotion subsided, and I decided to give her a chance. I told him that I was mindfully making this decision. I relayed my divorce terms to him, and he assured me of starting the paperwork immediately. I requested him to fast-track the process because I want to get done with it as soon as possible. Anyone who heard me would have assumed I was making an impulsive decision, but I was not. I love Dove, but not more than my self-respect. I told him that I trusted Dove with my life, and if I'm taking this decision, it is definitely severe. I cannot let her get away with the cheating. The papers would be ready in 72 hours. I drove home. Dove was sitting on the couch, eyes swollen, waiting. She asked if I'd left her. I sat down beside her. I took her hand, and I told her there was a way we could survive this, but only if she was brave enough to confess everything in person to both our families. Her eyes searched my face for the trap. She didn't find it. She said yes. I spent the next 3 days being the husband she thought she still had. I cooked for her. I let her fall asleep with her head on my shoulder while we watched television. On the second night, she reached for me in bed, tentative, trembling, her fingers tracing my collarbone like she was asking permission to exist near me, and I let her. I held her afterward while she cried into my chest and whispered times, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," times like a prayer she'd been saving. I stroked her hair and stared at the wall behind her and felt absolutely nothing. That's not true. I felt something. I felt the architectural thing, the cold scaffolding I'd been building since the dinner table lock into its final position. On the third morning, Arjun texted me a single word, times, ready, asterisk. I called both sets of parents that afternoon. Told them we needed a family sit-down, something important. My mother asked if everything was okay. I said Dove and I had something to share. Dove's mother asked the same question, and Dove, standing beside me gripping the kitchen counter, said yes, everything would be okay, that this was about healing. Healing. She actually used that word. We held it at our house, the garden house. Jasmine and lavender in full bloom outside the windows, the whole backyard, exhaling devotion and calm, while I arranged chairs in the living room like a courtroom gallery. My parents arrived first, then hers. Her father shook my hand at the door and said, "Whatever this is, I'm glad you two are facing it together." I smiled at him. I have never hated myself more than in that specific smile. Dove sat in the center of the room. I sat beside her, close, supportive, my hand on her knee. The families watched us, with the nervous reverence people reserve for couples announcing pregnancies or diagnoses. Dove looked at me. I nodded. She began. She told them everything. The strip club, the private room, the massage that became something else, the man whose name I still cannot hear. She told them about the drinking, about Priya's pressure, about the moment she decided the line was already crossed, so she might as well keep walking. She told them about the STD test, that she'd gotten it immediately, that she'd wanted to protect me even while destroying me. She told them she was sorry. She told them she loved me. She told them I had given her the chance to earn forgiveness by being honest here, in front of everyone, and that she was taking it because I was the only thing in her life worth being brave for. Her mother was crying. Her father's jaw was set so tight I could see the vein in his temple. My mother had her hand over her mouth. My father stared at the floor. Dove finished. She turned to me, eyes raw, face open, and she looked, "God help me," times relieved, asterisk, like she'd climbed the mountain, like the worst was over. I reached into the bag beside my chair and pulled out the envelope. "These are the divorce papers," I said. Arjun drafted them. "The terms are fair. I'm not asking for the house. I'm not contesting custody. We'll share it equally. I want this settled in 45 days. The room didn't gasp. It didn't erupt. It simply stopped the way a heart stops, one moment of rhythm, and then silence so complete you can hear the blood settling. Dove stared at the envelope. Then at me. Then at the envelope again. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched her eyes track backward through the last 3 days, the cooking, the shoulder, the night in bed, the times, thank you, thank you, thank you times, and I watched her understand. "You planned this," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She signed immediately. No argument, no negotiation, no scene. She took the pen from the table, opened to the flagged pages, and signed her name in handwriting so steady it terrified me. Then she set the pen down, stood up, and walked to the bedroom. The door closed with a click. Her parents left without speaking to me. Her father paused at the threshold and looked back, not with anger, but with something worse. Recognition. Like he understood exactly what I'd done and exactly why, and the understanding gave him no comfort at all. My mother touched my arm and said, "Was this necessary?" I said yes. She didn't ask again. The divorce settled in 45 days. Uncontested. Arjun handled everything with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd seen this surgery before and knew which cuts were clean and which ones scarred. Dove and I communicated through lawyers. She never called. Never texted. Never showed up at Neil's apartment where I'd been sleeping on an air mattress surrounded by another man's divorce boxes. The silence from her was so total it had its own weight, its own weather. We passed each other once at the courthouse. She was wearing the blue kurta I'd bought her for our anniversary. I don't know if that was deliberate. I don't know which answer would be worse. She looked at me, times looked not the sliding off gaze from before, and I saw something in her face that I will carry until I die. Not hatred, not grief, comprehension. She understood me completely, finally, and the understanding was the loneliest thing I'd ever seen. I drove home Neil's home and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. Here is what I know. I love Dove. I love Dove. Those are not contradictory statements, and they do not change anything. I engineered her humiliation in front of the people she loved most because I needed her to feel publicly and irreversibly the weight of what she'd done. I told myself it was self-respect. Maybe it was. Maybe self-respect and cruelty share a border so thin you can't see it until you've already crossed. My son starts kindergarten in September. He will grow up shuttling between 2 houses, 2 bedrooms, 2 versions of why mommy and daddy don't live together anymore. I will have to build him an answer that doesn't include the word times, revenge times, even though some nights alone on that air mattress, I suspect that's exactly what it was. The jasmine in the garden is still blooming. I drove past the house last week. She hasn't pulled it out. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I want to.
Story 5.
My wife spent over 40 hours crocheting a beautiful handmade shawl for the woman marrying the brother who made her childhood a living hell. The moment that shawl was in their hands, they uninvited her from the wedding. So I walked back into that office and took it right off his desk. My wife Lena was asked by her own mother to make this gift for her older brother George's fiancée Diane. They used Lena for her talent, then discarded her like she was nothing, and when I took the shawl back, the entire family turned on us. But they weren't expecting her brother Michael to pick a side too, and they definitely weren't expecting what happened at that reception. So here's the cast. I'm a guy in my late 30s. My wife is Lena. Her older brother is George. His new wife is Diane. Their mother is Vivian. And then there's Michael, Lena's other brother, and his wife Sarah, the only 2 people in that family who ever actually saw Lena. To understand what happened, you need to understand what Lena's childhood looked like. Because this wasn't a one-time slight. This was a pattern so deeply grooved into her family's behavior that they didn't even see it as cruelty anymore. They saw it as normal. When George graduated from uni, Lena was left at home. She was 8 years old and left home alone all day. Not with a neighbor, not with a babysitter, just left. The whole family, Vivian, George, grandparents, aunts, uncles, they all went to the ceremony, the dinner, the celebration, and Lena sat in an empty house watching cartoons until it got dark and she got scared enough to lock the front door herself. Christmas was spent mostly in her bedroom because her grandmother didn't want Lena around as her presence would just upset George. I need you to read that again. A child was told her presence times was upsetting, not her behavior, not something she did. Her existence in her room was treated as a provocation. So she'd sit upstairs with whatever book she could find while the rest of them opened presents and ate together downstairs until she was 14. Then she would sneak out and spend it with me and my family. That's how I met Lena. She was the girl from 2 streets over who showed up at our door on Christmas Day in a coat that was too thin, holding a tin of biscuits she'd made herself, asking my mom if she could watch telly with us. My mom didn't ask questions that first year. She just pulled up a chair. Lena was just left out of everything. Her dad used to work away from home a lot, so he had no idea what was going on. He just assumed Lena liked being on her own, that she was the quiet type, the independent one. That's the story, Vivian told him. And by the time he figured out the truth years later, after a breakdown Lena had at 19, the damage was architectural. It was load-bearing. You couldn't remove it without the whole thing coming down. George was the golden child. George got the attention, the investment, the protection, and Lena got what was left, which was usually nothing. So when Vivian called 3 months ago and asked Lena to crochet a shawl for Diane, George's fiancé, I watched my wife's face do something I've seen 100 times. This flicker. Hope, then suppression of hope, then a careful neutral expression she's perfected over 37 years of practice. Mom wants me to make something for the wedding, she said, and her voice was light in the way that means it isn't. I didn't say what I wanted to say. I said, "Do you want to?" She said yes. Of course she said yes. She picked out yarn herself. Drove to 3 different shops to find the exact shade of ivory that would match Diane's dress. She watched tutorials for a stitch pattern she'd never tried before, something intricate with a scalloped edge that made her hands cramp after 20 minutes. She worked on it every evening for weeks, I'd come downstairs at midnight and find her on the sofa with her reading glasses on, counting stitches under her breath, and I'd bring her tea and sit with her because I didn't know what else to do. 40 hours. That's what she put into it. 40 hours of her life poured into a gift for a woman she'd met twice, marrying a man who once locked her in a garden shed for 4 hours because she touched his PlayStation controller. The plan was simple. George and I work at the same company, different teams, but same building. Lena didn't want to see him, so Vivian arranged for me to hand the shawl to George at work. Fine, I could do that. I could be civil for 90 seconds. That Monday morning, I found George in the break room. I handed him the bag. Inside was the shawl wrapped in tissue paper with a handwritten card from Lena that said, "Times, wishing you both a beautiful day. With love, Lena." Asterisk. George looked in the bag, nodded, and said, "Tell her thanks." Not Times, thank Lena. Asterisk. Not Times, that's really kind of her. Asterisk. Just Times, tell her thanks. Asterisk. Like I was a courier. I went back to my desk. I did my work. I ate lunch. Normal Monday. Then at 1:30, my phone rang. Lena's voice was doing that thing again. Light in the way, that means it isn't. Diane just called. She said they've had to cut the guest list because of space at the venue, so we're not invited anymore. My hand tightened around the phone. She said she's really sorry and she hopes I understand. I could hear Lena breathing. Controlled. Measured. The breathing of someone who has practiced not crying in front of people since she was old enough to understand that her tears made things worse. When did she call? I asked. About 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes. The shawl had been in George's hands for 5 hours. They waited just long enough to make sure they had it, and then they made the call. I sat at my desk and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. Cold, absolute clarity. They never wanted Lena at that wedding. They wanted the shawl. They wanted 40 hours of her hands and her heart and her desperate hope that maybe this time would be different, and then they wanted her gone. I told Lena I loved her. I told her I'd be home soon. Then I stood up, walked down the corridor to George's department, and looked at his desk. Empty chair. He'd already left for the day. But sitting right there on the corner of his desk, still in the bag, tissue paper spilling out, was the shawl. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. A colleague glanced up. I didn't care. I picked up the bag, pulled a sticky note from George's own dispenser, and wrote 4 words times, "You don't deserve this," asterisk. I stuck it to his monitor, walked out of the building, and drove home with my wife's shawl on the passenger seat. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the family group chat had already detonated. The group chat was already 40 messages deep by the time I walked through the front door. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down, both hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She looked up when I came in and her eyes went straight to the bag in my hand. "You took it back," she said. Not a question. I took it back. She pressed her lips together. Her chin did that trembling thing she hates, the one she's been fighting since she was small enough to be sent to her room for having feelings. Then she nodded, once stood up and put her arms around me, and I held my wife in our kitchen while her phone buzzed against the table like something alive and furious. I picked it up. She let me. Vivian had written Times that shawl was a gift. You don't give something and take it back. That's not how family works. Asterisk. George Times Lena needs to grow up. This is embarrassing. Asterisk. Diane Times. I can't believe this is happening 2 weeks before our wedding. We tried to be kind about the guest list, and this is what we get. Asterisk. Then Vivian again Times. And I don't want the children thinking this behavior is acceptable. Maybe they should stay with us that weekend so they're not around all this negativity. Asterisk. My jaw locked. She was reaching for our kids now, using them as leverage the way she'd always used, proximity as a weapon, granting it, withholding it, dangling it, like something Lena had to earn. I started typing. Asterisk. This is Lena's husband. Lena didn't take the shawl. I did. She doesn't know I'm writing this, and she'd probably tell me to stop, because that's who she is, someone who has spent her entire life being gracious to people who don't deserve it. The shawl took her 40 hours. She drove to 3 shops to match the color. She stayed up until midnight every night for weeks. And the morning I handed it over, you waited 5 hours to uninvite her. You got what you wanted and you threw her away. Again. So yes, I took it back. And no, you're not having our children for the weekend. Or any weekend. Asterisk. I put the phone down. Lena was reading over my shoulder. She didn't stop me. The chat went quiet for 11 minutes. I counted. Then Michael. Asterisk. He's right. Asterisk. 2 words. And then times I've watched this my whole life and I've said nothing and I'm done saying nothing. George, you know exactly what you did. Mom, you know exactly what you've always done. Sarah and I won't be at the wedding. Asterisk. Vivian's response was, "Instant times. Michael, don't you dare." Asterisk. George, times, are you serious right now? Over a shawl. Asterisk. Michael, times. It was never about the shawl, George. You know that. Asterisk. Then Michael went offline. So did we. The wedding was on a Saturday. Michael texted me that morning times, taking the girls to the aquarium. Lena and the kids should come. Asterisk. So that's what we did. The six of us, me, Lena, R2, Michael, and Sarah, spent the afternoon watching penguins and eating overpriced chips in a cafe that smelled like chlorine and vinegar. Michael's daughter put a plastic starfish clip in Lena's hair, and Lena wore it for 3 hours. Sarah took a photo of all of us outside the gift shop, everyone mid-laugh, because Michael had just walked into a bollard while trying to read the parking sign. Michael posted it that evening. No caption, just the photo. Time-stamped during the wedding reception. I found out later through Sarah, who heard it from a cousin that George saw at mid-speeches, that he went white, then red, then excused himself from the top table, that Vivian followed him, that there was a scene in the corridor outside the function room that George's new in-laws absolutely witnessed, that Diane's father asked Vivian quite directly what was going on, and Vivian couldn't produce an answer that made sense because the truth times, my daughter wasn't invited to her own brother's wedding because we only needed her for the handmade gift times isn't something you can dress up for strangers. George's reception was ruined. Not by us, by the architecture of 37 years of cruelty finally becoming visible to people who hadn't been trained to look away. The following Monday, I requested a transfer to a different team. My manager didn't ask why. He just looked at me for a moment, said, "Probably wise," and approved it that afternoon. He'd seen the sticky note. He'd heard enough. Michael told us later that week that the venue had a capacity of 140. George and Diane had 93 guests. The space issue was a lie so thin you could read through it. I didn't tell Lena that people online were calling her a doormat or saying she needs to grow a spine. Those people clearly haven't had their spirit completely broken by the people who are meant to love them unconditionally. They haven't been 8 years old, left home alone all day while the whole family celebrates without them. They haven't spent Christmas in their bedroom because their grandmother decided their existence was a provocation. Lena apologized to me. That's the part that still sits in my chest like a stone. She apologized for times being upset, asterisk. She thanked me for taking the shawl back. She said, "I'm sorry, this is all so messy." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her she never had. We went no contact with George, Diane, and Vivian. Changed the locks because Vivian has a key. Blocked numbers. The silence has been strange and clean like the air after a storm pulls through. The shawl is still here. Lena soaked it in indigo dye last weekend, turned it from ivory to this deep, rich blue that makes it look like something entirely new. She's planning to wear it to Christmas at Michael and Sarah's. She had previously suggested that I could wear it too to work when George is back. She was laughing when she said it, actually laughing. I'm going to bring up therapy soon. Not yet. The dust is still settling and she's sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks and I don't want to push. But soon. For 37 years, Lena's family treated her like she was optional. Like she was someone who existed in the margins of their lives, useful when she could produce something invisible when she couldn't. She's not invisible anymore. Not to Michael. Not to Sarah. Not to our kids who will never sit in a bedroom alone on Christmas Day wondering what they did wrong. And not to me. Never to me.
Story 6.
My husband would tell you this story different. In his version, I'm the villain. The ungrateful, cheating wife who threw away a perfect life. And maybe I am. But a story is never just one person's version of the truth. My life with him, especially near the end, had become a ghost story, and I was the ghost. When I met David, it was electric. I was a teacher, he was in his last year of law school, and we were a team. We talked for hours about our future. Asterisk. Our time's future. He was going to be a brilliant lawyer, and I was going to get my master's, then my doctorate. We were going to build something amazing together. He was funny, he was smart, and he saw me. He really saw me. Then he passed the bar. I was so proud of him I thought my heart would burst. We celebrated, we toasted to that future we'd planned. And then he started his job at the firm. The 6 zero-hour weeks he promised were just temporary. just to pay off his massive student loans became 7 zero-hour weeks. Then they just became his life. Our team of 2 became a one-man show with a supporting character. Me, we'd agreed that I'd quit my teaching job. With his new salary, we could afford for me to go back to school full-time, just like we planned. It made sense on paper, but it meant my world shrank overnight. I went from having a career, colleagues, and my own paycheck to being at home alone studying in an apartment that was always silent. He called it providing. I called it disappearing. Our conversations became one-sided interviews. I'd try to tell him about a breakthrough I had in my research, or a funny story about a professor. He'd nod his thumb already, scrolling through emails on his phone. His mind was always somewhere else with a client who was in a real crisis, not with his wife who was just lonely. I started to feel like a line item in his budget. The strain of my tuition wasn't something he ever said out loud, but I felt it. I felt it in the way he'd sigh when a new bill came in, the way he'd talk about bonuses and billable hours, as if our whole life depended on them. I was just there. I kept the apartment clean, made sure he had food to eat when he finally stumbled home at 10 p.m., and I kept myself quiet so he could rest. I was a household appliance, a well-maintained piece of property. The loneliness was a physical weight. It sat on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I tried to talk to him about it a few times. He'd look at me completely confused. But you have everything, he'd say. I'm working this hard for Times Us, asterisk. But he wasn't. He was working that hard for him. I wasn't a part of the equation anymore. I was the reason the equation was so difficult to solve. Then one day the silence was broken. I ran into Bob at a coffee shop near campus. Bob was my boyfriend in college, my first serious relationship. We hadn't seen each other in almost a decade. It was that simple. There was no plan, no malice. He just saw me in line and said my name. We sat and talked for maybe an hour. He asked me what I was doing, what I was studying. And when I told him, he asked follow-up questions. He didn't look at his phone once, he just listened. He laughed at my jokes. He saw me the person, not the lawyer's wife. It was like a drink of water after years in the desert. That one coffee turned into another. It was my secret. My one little thing that was just for me. David was always working weekends, needing peace and quiet to prepare for a big case. He was exiling me from his life, so I found somewhere else to go. I filled the emptiness with someone who actually wanted to be with me. It got physical. I'm not going to lie or make excuses for that part. It just happened. Being with Bob was easy. It was feeling desired. It was feeling like the main character in my own life. For a few hours a week. In those moments, I wasn't thinking about my marriage or my husband at all. And I know how terrible that sounds, but it's the truth. My marriage already felt so empty that it was like I was single. I was just trying to escape the crushing loneliness of a life where I felt completely and utterly alone, even when my husband was sleeping right next to me. We took pictures. Stupid happy selfies on a day trip we took to the coast. We were just messing around. He had his arm around me, and in one of them we were kissing. I saved them to an old laptop hard drive. I had a place to keep things from that part of my life. I didn't know why exactly. Maybe I just needed proof that I existed, that someone had seen me. The necklace. That's the part that David will focus on. The part he used to convict me. In some of the photos, I'm wearing a simple silver necklace he gave me for our first anniversary. He points it out. It will sound like the ultimate betrayal. Like I was flaunting his love while I was in the arms of another man. But the truth is so much more pathetic. That necklace was a gift, yes, but it had become my times necklace. I never took it off. It was a part of me like a mole on my skin. I didn't put it on that day to spite him or to make a statement. I didn't think about it at all. I just forgot it was there. Because in those moments with Bob, I had forgotten about David too. That was the real tragedy. I ended it with Bob about a month ago. The guilt was starting to eat at me, and I knew what I was doing wasn't a solution. It was a temporary fix for a problem I needed to face. I was going to talk to David. I was going to demand we go to counseling, that we find that team we used to be. I was preparing my speech, gathering my courage. I came home yesterday afternoon from the library. David was supposed to be at the office until late, preparing for a big deposition. But his car was in the driveway. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I walked inside, and the apartment was dead silent. His briefcase was on the floor, his coat thrown over a chair. It was messy, which was unlike him. "David!" I called out. No answer. I walked toward our home office. The door was ajar. And then I saw it. In a box in the back of my closet, I keep old electronics and memories. Old phones, chargers, and that old laptop hard drive. It's been in that box for years. But the box was on the floor of the office open, and the hard drive wasn't inside. My eyes shot to his desk. I saw the small black rectangle and the blue glow of its indicator light. It was plugged into his PC. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I took a slow step into the office, then another. The monitor glowed a cold, clinical light in the dim room. On the screen was the photo. The one of me and Bob on the coast, the wind in my hair, a stupidly happy, carefree smile on my face. The one where he was leaning in to kiss my cheek. I felt sick. My whole body went cold, then hot. He'd seen it. He'd seen everything. My first thought wasn't shame, it was a desperate, panicked need to explain. To tell him about the loneliness, the silence, to make him understand the times why, asterisk. He had to let me explain. But David is a lawyer. He doesn't listen to explanations. He listens to evidence. And the evidence was right there. My eyes scanned the desk, looking for a note, a letter, anything. And then I saw it. It was so small, so petty, that it stole my breath. A little yellow sticky note stuck to the bottom of the monitor. On it was his precise, neat handwriting, the same he used for legal briefs. It was just an arrow drawn in black ink pointing up at the screen. Not at my face or Bob's. It pointed directly at the little silver necklace I was wearing in the photo. That's when I knew this wasn't about heartbreak. This wasn't the lashing out of a man in pain. This was the calculated cruelty of a prosecuting attorney delivering his closing argument. The arrow wasn't a cry of, "How could you?" It was a gotcha. He wasn't wounded. He was winning. He had found the one piece of evidence that made my crime not just an infidelity, but a personal targeted betrayal. He had twisted the knife with surgical precision. I stumbled back from the desk and pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. A frantic jumble of words. "David, please, we have to talk. Please, let me explain." I hit send. A moment later, a notification popped up. Asterisk. Message blocking is active. Asterisk. He had already blocked my number. He hadn't even waited for me to get home. He found the photos, set his trap, and then cut off all communication before I even knew there was a war. Panic set in, real and suffocating. This wasn't a fight. You can't have a fight with someone who refuses to show up. I ran through the apartment. His closet was half empty. His dop kit was gone from the bathroom. He had packed a bag. He had planned this. My frantic calls weren't to beg for forgiveness, not yet. They were a desperate attempt to find the man I married, inside the cold, analytical stranger he had become. I called his office the next morning, my voice cracking. The paralegal who had always been so friendly to me was suddenly ice. "Mr. Miller is in depositions all day and has instructed us he is not to be disturbed," she said in a monotone. "All future communication should go through his legal counsel." "His legal counsel? I'm his wife!" I screamed into the phone. "Not for long, I imagine," she said and hung up. I was losing my mind. The silence in the apartment was a living thing now, mocking me. I had to see him. I had to look him in the eye. I knew where he'd be. His brother Mark lived 20 minutes away. They were incredibly close. I got in my car and drove, rehearsing what I would say, my heart a lead weight in my chest. When I pulled up to Mark's house, I saw David's car in the driveway. A wave of relief washed over me. He was here. I could talk to him. I ran up to the door and rang the doorbell. I could hear dogs barking inside, deep, loud barks, Dobermans. Mark was obsessed with them. The door opened a crack. It was Mark, not David. He looked at me with pure disgust. "You need to leave Wendy," he said, his voice flat. "Mark, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I just need to talk to him. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "He doesn't want to talk to you," he said, starting to close the door. I put my hand on the door to stop him. "Please, just let me see him." His face hardened. "You're not listening. Get off my property, now." From behind him, one of the Dobermans growled a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the door. "I'm not kidding," Mark said, his eyes like chips of ice. "Take one more step and I'll let the dog say hello." I froze. He would do it. He would actually let his dogs on me. This was the family that had welcomed me in, that had called me a sister. Now they were pointing a weapon at me. David had done more than just leave. He had circled the wagons. He had turned his family and his law firm into a fortress, and I was the enemy at the gate. I walked back to my car, defeated, humiliated. That was the last time I tried to make direct contact. It's been 3 weeks. I received a letter from a lawyer I've never heard of. It informed me that David had filed for divorce and that I would be served papers shortly. It also stated that he had canceled all our joint credit cards and that a check for a provisional allowance was enclosed. My life had been reduced to a legal transaction. He told his brother he feels nothing for me anymore. Not anger, not sadness. Just nothing. And that's the part that breaks my heart into a million pieces. Because it proves what I feared all along, sitting alone in that silent apartment. I wasn't a partner he had lost. I wasn't a wife he was mourning. I was just a case. A messy, emotional file he'd reviewed, made a decision on, and closed. He'd moved on to the next one, and I was left in the evidence locker. My biggest mistake wasn't cheating on my husband. It was not realizing I'd been married to a ghost all along.
Story 7.
I'm not trying to say I'm a saint. I know what I did was wrong. My ex-husband Mark has probably told everyone his version, where I'm the villain who threw our marriage away for some guy at work. And from the outside, I guess it looks that way. But stories are never that simple, are they? There's always the part you don't see. The quiet, lonely hours that lead up to the big explosion. Our marriage didn't die the day Mark found those texts. It had been dying a slow death for years, and I was just the one who finally pulled the plug. We got married young. I was 20 and he was 21. We were full of plans and ideas, thinking we had it all figured out. But life gets in the way. He got a good job, I got a job, and we settled into a routine. The problem with routine is that it can slowly sandpaper away all the interesting parts of a person until you're just left with a smooth, boring surface. I started to feel invisible. It wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was him scrolling through his phone while I was telling him about my day. It was me making his favorite dinner and him not even noticing, just eating while watching TV. I'd ask him, "How was your day?" and get a fine. I'd try to start a conversation, maybe about a movie or something funny I saw online, and he'd give me a little nod, his eyes still glued to his screen. I felt like a ghost in my own house. I could have worn a clown suit to breakfast, and I don't think he would have looked up. The loneliness was the worst part. You can be in a room full of people and feel lonely, but there is no loneliness worse than sitting next to the person who is supposed to be your partner and feeling completely and utterly alone. The silence in our house was heavy. It wasn't a comfortable, peaceful silence. It was the silence of two strangers living in the same space, each inside their own little bubble. I tried. I really did. I suggested date nights, but we'd just end up at a restaurant, him on his phone, me staring at the breadbasket, wondering why I even bothered. I felt like I was starving, but for affection, for attention, for a simple conversation that didn't feel like a chore. Then Alex started at my work. He was just a guy in the next cubicle. At first, it was nothing. Just good morning and small talk by the coffee machine. But then he started to actually times C times me. He'd ask me a question and then actually listen to the answer. He noticed when I got a new haircut. He remembered I liked a certain kind of tea and would bring me a cup without me asking. They were such small things, but to a person dying of thirst, even a drop of water feels like an ocean. Our conversation started spilling over into texts. It was innocent at first. A funny meme about work, a complaint about our boss. Then it became more personal. We talked about our dreams, our frustrations, the things we were passionate about. I learned more about him in 2 weeks of texting than I'd learned about my own husband in the last 2 years. He made me laugh. A real deep belly laugh that I hadn't felt in forever. I would find myself smiling at my phone like a teenager. And a little piece of the old me. The me before the invisibility cloak started to come back. The feelings grew faster than I could control. I wasn't looking for an affair. I was just looking for a friend, a connection. But he was giving me everything I was missing at home. He made me feel smart and funny and seen. And yes, things got romantic. The texts went from friendly to flirty to more. One night, after a particularly long and silent evening with Mark, Alex and I were texting. He was telling me all the things he liked about me, and it was like he was listing everything Mark had stopped noticing years ago. In that moment, I felt so overwhelmed with gratitude and affection that I typed it. I love you. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't a lie. I loved the way he made me feel. I loved that he saw me. It was a desperate, messy kind of love born out of loneliness. One day, we were talking about how empty my house felt when Mark was at work. Mark works long 12-hour shifts, so I'm alone a lot. Half joking, I said, Alex should come over for coffee sometime just to make the place feel less like a tomb. He agreed, saying he'd love to. We even picked a day. But as soon as I sent the text, a wave of panic and guilt washed over me. This was a line. A real physical line I was about to cross. My heart was pounding. I couldn't do it. A few hours later, my hands shaking, I texted him and told him it was a bad idea and we couldn't. He understood. He never came over. We never even saw each other outside of work. It was just a stupid plan that never happened. But the texting continued. It was my secret little world where I wasn't a ghost. It was my escape. Last night was a typical Tuesday. Mark was on the couch, controller in his hands, completely absorbed in his video game. I was on the other end of the couch, phone in my hands, texting Alex. He'd sent me a stupid joke and I was smiling. A real smile. I typed out a reply and set my phone face down on the coffee table while I got up to use the bathroom. It was just for a minute. A single, careless minute. When I came back into the living room, the sound from the TV was off. The only noise was the low hum of the refrigerator. Mark wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He had turned his whole body to face the empty spot on the couch where I'd been sitting. He was just staring at me. His face was completely blank, but his eyes. There was a look in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, something broken. He didn't say a word. He just held up my phone. The screen was lit up. My heart dropped into my stomach. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the phone in his hand, my phone with my secret world lit up for him to see. I don't know which message was on the screen, the "I love you," or the one about Alex coming over. It didn't matter. They were all bad. "Who's Alex?" he asked. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, which was so much scarier than if he had yelled. My own voice came out shaky. "He's just a guy from work, Mark. It's not what you think." He let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound I'd never heard him make before. "Not what I think. It says, 'I love you.' It says he was going to come here, to our house, while I was at work." What am I supposed to think? And that's when the dam broke. All the years of frustration, of feeling invisible, of being so lonely I thought I would scream it all, came pouring out. "What were you supposed to think?" "I don't know, Mark." "When was the last time you even looked at me? When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer?" "This has nothing to do with that," he shouted, finally finding his volume. He stood up, pacing back and forth in the small space between the couch and the TV. "You cheated on me! You were texting another man! You love him!" I was lonely, I screamed back, tears streaming down my face now. I felt like a piece of furniture in my own home. I would talk, and the words would just hit a wall. "You were here, but you were a million miles away in that stupid game or on your phone." "Alex? He actually saw me." "He talked to me." "So you were going to bring him into our bed?" he spat. And the words hit me like a slap. "He never came over. I told him not to. It was a stupid idea that I stopped. It was just texting, Mark. It was words because I couldn't get any from you." The fight went on for hours. It was ugly. We threw every resentment we had at each other, from the big things to the stupid petty things. He saw a liar and a cheater. I saw a man who had let our marriage starve to death and was only now noticing the body. By the end of it, we were both exhausted. There were no more tears or yelling, just a hollow, empty feeling in the room. We were broken. And for the first time, we both knew it. A few days later, after sleeping in separate rooms and barely speaking, he came to me and said, "We should try therapy." I think he expected me to say no to prove I didn't want to fix things. But I agreed. A tiny, foolish part of me hoped that maybe a stranger could translate for us, could make him understand what I had been trying to say for years. The therapy session was a disaster. We sat on a beige couch in a quiet office that smelled like old books. The therapist was a kind-looking woman who asked us to share our feelings. Mark went first. He calmly explained that I'd had an emotional affair, that I'd betrayed his trust. He laid out the facts, the text, the I love you, the plan for a visit. It sounded so clinical, so simple. He was the victim, I was the villain. Then it was my turn. I tried to explain the loneliness, the invisibility. I tried to tell her about the silence, about feeling like a ghost. I stumbled over my words, trying to make her and Mark understand the deep ache that led me to it. But I could see the look on Mark's face. He wasn't hearing me. He was just hearing excuses. He crossed his arms, staring at the floor. The therapist nodded and said, "Trust is a very difficult thing to rebuild." It felt like she was siding with him, like the why didn't matter, only the what. I left that office feeling more hopeless than ever. We had spent an hour and $200 just to confirm what we already knew: we were on completely different planet. That night, the house was silent again. But it was a new kind of silence. It was the silence of defeat. I sat on the couch, the same one where it had all blown up. And I felt that familiar loneliness creep back in, colder and sharper this time. And I did something stupid. I picked up my phone. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was the worst thing I could possibly do. But it was a compulsion, like scratching an itch until it bleeds. I needed to feel seen just for a second. I sent Alex a simple text, "I'm not okay." His reply came back almost instantly. "I'm here if you want to talk." And that was it. That's all it took. The therapy hadn't fixed the root problem. It just put a bandage on a gaping wound. Mark couldn't give me what I needed. The therapist couldn't give me what I needed. But Alex could. So I went back to the only source of water I could find in the desert, even though I knew it was poison. I don't know if Mark found out I was texting him again or if he just felt it. Maybe he could see that the tiny spark of hope we had was gone. About a week later, he sat down with me at the kitchen table. There was no anger left in his face, just a deep, unshakable sadness. "This isn't working, is it?" he said softly. I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "No. I don't think I can ever trust you again," he said. "And you're not happy. I see that now." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. He finally saw me. But it was too late. We talked for a little while about logistics, about who would get what. It was calm and quiet. The fight was over. We were just two people who had hurt each other too much to go back. We decided to get a divorce. I'm not trying to say I'm a good person. I know I hurt him. I see that. I will carry the guilt of that with me forever. But I'm not the simple villain he probably paints me as. I'm just a person who made a terrible mistake because I was drowning and grabbed onto the wrong life raft. Our marriage was a house that was already rotting from the inside. I didn't set the fire, but I was the one holding the match when it all burned down.
Story 8.
I know how this sounds. I'm the wife who cheated. The one who blew up a perfectly good marriage. I'm the villain in this story, and my husband is the hero who somehow found it in himself to stay. I get it. I've told myself that story 1,000 times. But the truth is, the marriage wasn't perfectly good. And I wasn't just looking for a thrill. I was suffocating, and I did a terrible thing to try and get some air. My husband and I got married in 2005. On paper, we had it all. Good jobs, a nice house, a stable life. He is a good man. He's kind, he's steady, and he always supported me. But our foundation was built on things we never ever talked about. I was raised in a very strict, high-control church. My entire life I was taught that my value was tied to my purity. My body wasn't mine. It was something to be guarded, covered up, and saved for my future husband. It was a potential source of temptation for men, a problem to be managed. When I married my husband, I gave him my virginity. It felt like handing over the most valuable thing I owned, the one thing my entire upbringing told me was priceless. For over a decade, I played the part of the good Christian wife. I did everything I was supposed to do. But around 2016, things started to fall apart for me. The church got heavily into politics in a way that made my stomach turn. I started seeing the whole purity culture for what it was, a cage. It wasn't about being holy. It was about shame and control. At the same time, we still didn't have kids. Every month without a pregnancy felt like a personal failure, like God Himself was telling me I wasn't good enough. My husband never said a word, he never pressured me, but that didn't matter. I carried the shame of it deep in my gut. We loved each other, but we were like two people living in the same house who didn't really speak the same language. We were both raised by parents who weren't big on feelings, so we just repeated that. We never talked about the hard stuff, the messy stuff. He would shut down or avoid conflict, and I was just falling apart inside. I was burning out at my job. I was grieving a close friend who had died. And I was shedding this religious identity that had been my whole world. I had nothing to replace it with, and no one to talk to. I've never felt so completely alone while sleeping next to someone every night. The breaking point was a funeral in 2019. I was sitting there looking at the casket, and this wave of pure terror washed over me. I realized I hadn't actually lived my life. I had just followed a set of rules. And then I met him. It wasn't some movie moment. He wasn't a temptation I had to fight. He was just a conversation. We started talking, and for the first time in forever, I felt like someone was actually listening. When I told him about my doubts with the church, my burnout, the shame, I felt he didn't try to fix me. He didn't give me advice. He just listened and looked at me like he understood. Like he saw, times me times, not the perfect wife I was pretending to be. Asking for his number didn't feel like I was crossing a line. It felt like I was grabbing a life raft. The texting started soon after. It was just friendly stuff. We talked about books, music, our jobs. It was my secret little space where I could be myself. When my husband found me smiling at my phone and asked if something was going on between me and this new friend, I said no. And in my head, it wasn't even a lie. It wasn't about sex. It was about having a connection. It was my emotional oxygen, and I wasn't going to give it up. He asked me a second time, a few weeks later, more suspicious, and I denied it again more firmly. I was protecting the one thing that felt like it was mine. Then my husband had to leave for a 5-week work trip. The first few days were fine, but then the silence of the house started to get to me. It was so loud. It felt like the perfect symbol for the emptiness I had inside. Inviting him over was a stupid, reckless decision born out of pure desperation. I told myself we were just going to hang out as friends, watch a movie. We started drinking. He drank a lot more than I did, and he started talking about all the broken parts of his own life. I saw my own loneliness reflected in him. When it got late, I told him he shouldn't drive. He could crash on the couch. It was a series of tiny, awful choices. Each one felt logical at the time, but they were all leading to the same place. The truth is, I just didn't want to be alone in that silent house again. The line between him sleeping on the couch and him sleeping in the spare bedroom got blurry. Then the line between the spare bedroom and my bedroom disappeared completely. It happened in my marital home, in the bed I shared with my husband. And it wasn't some passionate romantic scene. It was a rebellion. It was me taking back a body I'd been taught my whole life to be ashamed of. It was a clumsy, messy, destructive act to feel something anything other than numb. In that moment, he didn't ask me to be anything other than what I was. He didn't judge me. He just accepted the broken person in front of him, and it felt like breathing after being held underwater. The fantasy didn't last long. For a few months, I lived a double life. The guilt was eating me alive, but the validation was like a drug. Then he dropped the bomb. He gave me an ultimatum. I can't do this anymore, he said. You need to leave your husband, or I'm walking away. Just like that, the illusion shattered. He wasn't my savior. He wasn't a lifeline. He was just another person with another set of rules I had to follow. He was another cage. I was trapped. My husband offered me a stable life, a future, but a future where I felt invisible. This other man offered me a fleeting feeling of being seen, but he offered no future at all. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in my hand, and realized I had set my entire life on fire. And now I was about to be left with nothing but the ashes. The depression that followed was a physical thing. It felt like a heavy blanket I couldn't throw off, making it hard to breathe, hard to move. I was crying all the time, hiding in the bathroom at work, sobbing in my car. I was about to lose everything. The man who offered a temporary escape had shown me he was just another dead end. The man who offered a real future, a whole life we had built together, had no idea who I really was. I had to choose, but there was no good choice. There was only losing him or losing my husband. I told the other man I couldn't leave my husband. He was gone just like he promised. The brief feeling of being seen vanished, and I was left with the horrible, crushing weight of what I had done. Before I could bring myself to confess, I tried to fix it. I tried to undo everything by being the perfect wife. I started dressing up in the clothes I knew my husband liked. I went out and helped him in the yard, something I never did. I started going to the gym with him every morning. I was desperately trying to be the woman I should have been all along, hoping that if I acted the part well enough, the reality of the last 4 months would just disappear. But it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. Every time he smiled at me, clueless and kind, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was a ghost in my own home, and the guilt was eating me alive. I knew I had to tell him. I couldn't live with a secret anymore. I'd already started going to a therapist on my own a few weeks earlier, trying to figure out why I would blow up my own life. It was through talking to her that I realized I couldn't start to heal anything until the truth was out. Confessing was the single most terrifying thing I have ever done. We were sitting on the couch, the same couch where I had sat with the other man. I just started talking, and the words tumbled out ugly and clumsy. I told him everything. I saw the exact moment the words registered. His face just collapsed. The man I knew, the steady, unshakable man I had loved for 15 years, just broke right in front of me, and I was the one holding the hammer. His pain was like nothing I'd ever seen. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, soul-crushing agony. It was a fire, and it burned down everything we had ever built. The questions came one after another. Where? When? How many times in our bed? Each answer was another blow. He got up and started pacing, looking at our home like it was a stranger's house. He couldn't stay. He packed a bag, and before he left, I asked him to promise me he wouldn't do anything to hurt himself. He just looked at me with dead eyes and said, "I can't promise you that." Then he walked out the door. Those 4 days he was gone were the longest of my life. The silent house wasn't just empty anymore. It was full of his pain. I didn't know if he was alive or dead. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat with the destruction I had caused. I dove into books about betrayal, about trauma, anything I could find that might help me understand the damage I'd inflicted. I was trying to find a language for his pain because I knew if he ever came back, I'm sorry, wouldn't be nearly enough. He finally came home. He looked like a shell of himself. He told me he couldn't promise we would make it, but he was willing to try. He said the old marriage was over. I had killed it. If we were going to move forward, we would have to start from scratch, like two strangers. He wanted us to go on dates. He wanted us to go to counseling together. It was more than I deserved. It was a gift of grace I never expected. Therapy was brutal. For the first time in our entire relationship, we actually talked. Not about work or bills or what to have for dinner. We talked about our childhoods, our fears, the reasons we were both so emotionally closed off. We uncovered all the layers of silence and polite distance that had defined our marriage. I learned about the loneliness he felt, and he learned about the suffocation I felt. We were two people who had slept side by side for years, but had never truly let the other person in. My affair was the crisis that forced the door open. It took months. There were days he couldn't even look at me. There were nights we both just cried. But slowly, painfully, we started to build something new on the rubble of our old life. We were honest in a way we had never been before. Brutally, radically honest. We talked about everything, no matter how uncomfortable. About 7 months after my confession, we were talking about the future. We knew we couldn't go back to the way things were. The silence and the secrets were what broke us. That's when the idea of polyamory came up. At first it sounded crazy. But the more we talked about it, the more it made a strange kind of sense for us. It wasn't an excuse to sleep around. It was the opposite. It was a commitment to tear down every wall. It was a promise to never ever have a secret again. It meant all connections, all feelings, all attractions had to be on the table, discussed openly, and with consent from everyone involved. It's our new foundation. It's a promise of complete and total transparency. It's our way of making sure that shame and secrets can never grow in the dark again. I know people won't understand it. They'll see it as a broken marriage, a weird arrangement, or me just getting what I wanted all along. But they don't see the long, hard nights of talking, the therapy sessions, the work we have put in to understand each other. Our old marriage is dead. I killed it. But the one we have now, the one built on radical honesty and a refusal to hide from the truth, is more real and more intimate than anything we had before. I broke him, and I broke us. But from the ashes, we decided to build something together that could never be burned down in the same way again.
Story 9.
My husband thinks I don't see the way he looks at me anymore. He's wrong. I see everything. I see the way his eyes skim over me instead of settling. I see the quick, tight smile he gives me when I get dressed. A smile that says, "Good effort," instead of, "You're beautiful." Most of all, I see the way he looks at his sister and then back at me. It's in that split-second comparison that I feel myself disappear. We had our babies around the same time. Our beautiful, perfect daughter arrived in March, and his sister's little boy came in April. I'm 38. This was my miracle baby, the one I'd waited my whole life for. His sister is 21. For her it was an oops, but a happy one, of course, because her life is one long, happy accident. And that's where the problem started. She didn't just bounce back. It's like the baby was never there. A flat stomach, tiny waist, not a single stretch mark. She paraded around in a crop top at the family barbecue 6 weeks postpartum. 6 weeks. I was still wearing adult diapers and wincing every time I sat down. My husband Mark started getting obsessed. He'd scroll through her Instagram showing me pictures. "Look at Chloe, isn't she amazing?" he'd say. And it felt like a knife twisting. Amazing. Yes, she's amazing. It's also amazing what you can achieve when your parents pay for a full-time nanny, a personal chef who specializes in postpartum nutrition, and a trainer who comes to your house 3 times a week. I don't have any of that. I have a baby who won't sleep unless she's on my chest. A C-section scar that still aches and a hunger that feels like a black hole in my stomach from breastfeeding around the clock. The worst part is I gave him the ammunition he's using against me now. One night I broke down. I was exhausted hormonal, and I just spent 10 minutes trying to zip up a pair of my old jeans and failing. I was looking at a picture Chloe had posted, a selfie in a bikini, and the comments were all fire emojis and people saying, "I wish I looked like you." I was crying, and I whispered to Mark, "I'd do anything to look like her. I just want to feel like myself again." I wanted him to hold me. I wanted him to say, "You're beautiful, you just had a baby. Be kind to yourself. I wanted him to see times me, times his wife, the mother of his child who was hurting. Instead, his eyes lit up. He saw a problem to be solved. And apparently, I was the problem. He went into what I call his fix-it mode. The next day he called Chloe. I heard him on the phone taking notes. So no carbs at all, okay. And processed foods, got it. Lots of vegetables. He came into the living room looking like he'd discovered the cure for cancer. I've got the plan, he announced proudly. We're going to do this. I'm going to help you. His help was a new kind of hell. He started watching everything I ate. If I reached for a cracker, he'd say, "Is that on Chloe's plan?" He'd make these huge, disgusting vegetable smoothies for breakfast that I had to choke down. He threw out the granola bars I kept by the bed for middle-of-the-night feeding sessions because they had too much sugar. My own home started to feel like a fat camp run by a drill sergeant who used to love me. I tried to explain to him that I'm breastfeeding, that I'm hungry all the time, I need calories, I need energy, I can't live on steamed kale and grilled chicken. He just waved it off. Chloe's breastfeeding too, and she's not eating junk, he said. I wanted to scream that Chloe also gets 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep and has someone else cook her perfectly balanced, calorie-dense, and nutritious meals. I just get whatever I can grab with one hand while holding a screaming baby. Yesterday was the breaking point. He told me he'd take care of the groceries from now on to remove the temptation. I knew what that meant. Our fridge would become a green and beige prison of health foods I didn't have the time or energy to cook. So while he was at the gym, I took the baby and I went to the store myself. It felt like an act of rebellion. I bought the things that felt like home. A loaf of sourdough bread for toast in the morning, a box of pasta, and a jar of sauce for a 10-minute dinner. I even bought a bag of chocolate-covered pretzels, my one weakness. I wasn't planning on eating the whole bag. I just wanted to know it was there. I wanted one thing in my life that was just for me. One little piece of comfort that wasn't up for debate. I came home and hid the pretzels in the back of the pantry. I left the other groceries on the counter and went to put the baby down for her nap. She actually went down without a fight for once. It felt like a sign. A small victory. I walked back to the kitchen, my mouth already watering for a piece of toast, thick with butter. It was the only thing I'd been looking forward to all day. The first thing I noticed was the smell. A weird, savory, boiling vegetable smell. Mark was standing at the stove, stirring a big pot, his back to me. He was in his workout clothes, sweat still glistening on his neck. He turned around and gave me that bright problem solver smile. "Hey, honey. Just making us a healthy soup for dinner?" My eyes went to the counter where I'd left the grocery bag. It was gone. All of it. The bread, the pasta, the sauce. A cold dread started to creep up my spine. I walked over to the pantry and opened it. I pushed aside the quinoa and the cans of chickpeas. The back of the shelf was empty. My pretzels were gone too. I stood there for a moment, the pantry door open, just staring at the empty space where my little bit of happiness used to be. I took a slow breath and turned around to face him. He was still smiling, completely oblivious, like a hero waiting for his medal. I held out the spoon, offering her a taste of the soup. "I'm helping you. This is what you wanted, remember? You said you'd do anything to be like Chloe." Her face, which had been pale with confusion, turned a deep, blotchy red. "My food, Mark." "Where is it?" she said again, her voice low and tight like a wire about to snap. "It's gone," I said, trying to keep my tone even and reasonable. "I threw it out. We can't have that stuff in the house if we're serious about this. It's temptation. You were sabotaging yourself the minute I turned my back." That's when the screaming started. It was like a dam breaking. Not just yelling, but this raw, guttural sound that didn't even seem like it could come from her. "I'm breastfeeding!" she shrieked, her hands flying up to her head. "I need to eat. I'm hungry all the time." That was my food. I put the spoon down, my frustration starting to boil over. Logic wasn't working. Chloe is breastfeeding too, and she's not eating bags of pretzels. It's an excuse. "Chloe has a cook!" she screamed back, tears now streaming down her face. "Chloe has a trainer! Chloe has her parents paying for a nanny so she can sleep 8 hours a night. Don't you dare compare me to her." Of course, I was comparing them. How else do you measure success? You take a goal, you look at the person who achieved it, and you replicate the steps. It's simple. It's efficient. "This isn't about her cook or her trainer," I said, raising my voice to be heard over her crying. "This is about simple choices. It's about putting down the bread and picking up a vegetable." She just shook her head, sobbing. "You don't get it. You haven't looked at me, not really, since our daughter was born. You look right through me. I'm just a project to you now. A problem you need to fix." She was twisting everything. This whole thing, this grand gesture of taking control and helping her, was my attempt to find her again. To bring back the woman who didn't sigh at her own reflection. To get back the connection she herself said she felt was fading. I was doing this times for us asterisk. I threw up my hands in defeat. Fine. I try to help you with the one thing you told me was making you miserable, and I'm the bad guy. I get it. She didn't say another word. She just turned and walked out of the kitchen. A minute later, I heard our bedroom door slam shut. I was left alone in the kitchen. The healthy soup simmering on the stove. A perfect logical solution that nobody wanted. The whole house was silent, except for the gentle bubbling of the pot. The next few days were a special kind of hell. A cold war fought in whispers and averted gazes. The soup sat in the fridge untouched. I'd eat a bowl for lunch, telling myself it was delicious, that it was the taste of discipline. She ate things that were technically healthy, but with a kind of quiet fury. She'd stand at the counter and eat a plain salad with no dressing or a piece of dry chicken, her jaw tight. She wasn't doing it to be healthy. She was doing it to spite me. To show me how miserable my plan was making her. She stopped talking to me about anything other than the baby. Does she need a diaper change? Can you watch her while I shower? Every question was transactional. The warmth was gone. I'd come home from work and the air in our house would be thick and heavy with everything she wasn't saying. One evening, I found her in the nursery just holding our daughter and crying silently in the dark. I stood in the doorway wanting to go to her, to hold her, but I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry. I want you to be happy." Felt like the wrong move. I finally broke down and called my sister. I needed a sanity check. "I don't get it, Chloe," I said, pacing in the backyard. "I did exactly what you told me. I got rid of all the junk food. I made healthy meals, and she's acting like I committed a crime." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mark! You threw her food away like in the trash." "Yeah, she bought it right after I'd done the healthy shopping." It was a cry for help. I had to be the strong one. "Oh, honey, no," Chloe sighed. And for a second I thought she was going to lecture me. But then she said, "You can't just force it. It's a mindset. But you're right about the food. Getting all the processed carbs out of the house was the single most important step for me. It's just, you know how emotional she is. You have to be delicate, emotional." That was it. That was the word. I wasn't wrong in my plan, just in my delivery. I hadn't accounted for how emotional she would be. Chloe understood. I felt a wave of relief. My logic was sound. I just needed to be more delicate. That night, I tried again. I went into the bedroom where she was folding baby clothes on the bed, her back to me. "Hey," I said softly. "I've been thinking. I get that I was a little aggressive. I'm sorry about that. But my goal was a good one. I just want you to feel good again. I want us times to be good again." She didn't turn around. She just kept folding a tiny pink onesie with meticulous, angry precision. "Do you know what would make me feel good, Mark?" she said, her voice flat. "It would be for my husband to think I was beautiful even if I still have a belly. It would be for him to bring me a cookie when I'm up at 3 a.m. with the baby, not to throw my food in the garbage. It would be for him to hold me and tell me I'm a good mom, not hand me a diet plan based on his 1-year-old sister." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were empty. "You didn't do this for me. You did this for you. You don't like how I look, and you thought you could fix me." I opened my mouth to argue, to explain that he was wrong, that she had it all backwards. But no words came out. Because in that moment, she didn't look like my wife. She looked like a stranger. A sad, tired stranger who was convinced I was her enemy. And I had no idea how to solve that. I had the blueprint, the plan, the perfect solution. And she just refused to see it. What are you supposed to do when someone you love doesn't want to be fixed?
Story teen.
I'm the ex-girlfriend who took the wedding money. I know what you've all probably heard, and I know how it sounds. I'm the crazy, cheating girl who emptied our joint account to run off with some guy I met in a video game. I get it. It sounds terrible, but you've only heard his side of the story. You heard about the numbers, the bank statements. You haven't heard about the 6 years before that, or the 1 year that broke everything. For 6 years, Mark and I were a team. Not just a couple, a team. We did everything together. We finished each other's sentences, we knew each other's takeout orders by heart, and we planned our whole future on a dozen napkins in our favorite diner. We were going to get married, buy a small house with a yard for a dog, and just be happy. It was simple, and it was all I ever wanted. Then came the job offer in September 2019. It was a huge opportunity for him, a major step up in his career. The only catch was that it was in a city 5 hours away. He sold it to me as a sacrifice. "This is for us," he'd say, holding my hands. "I'll work like crazy for a few years. We'll save up and we can have the wedding of our dreams. It's for our future." I believed him. I loved him, so of course I believed him. So he moved. And I stayed behind in our apartment, the one we'd picked out together. At first it was hard, but manageable. He'd come home every other weekend, and we'd have a flurry of dates and catch-up sessions before he had to leave again. But the job was demanding. The 1-2 hour shifts he'd mentioned weren't an exaggeration. Soon every other weekend became once a month, if I'm lucky. The phone calls changed too. They went from long late-night talks about our feelings and our day to quick 5-minute check-ins while he was on his break. He was always tired. He'd ask how I was, but before I could really answer, he'd launch into a story about his work, his boss, his projects, the annoying guy in the next cubicle. I became a sounding board for his new life, a life I had no part in. Meanwhile, I was living in a museum of our old life. His stuff was still in the closet. His favorite mug was still in the cabinet. And I was supposed to be planning our dream wedding. Alone. I picked the venue by myself, sending him blurry photos for his approval. I went to cake tasting and brought home little boxes of samples to eat by myself on the couch. I spent hours on the phone with caterers and florists, making decisions for a party of 2 when one of us wasn't even there. The big, beautiful wedding binder he bought me sat on the coffee table, a constant reminder of the future I was building by myself. I wasn't his partner anymore. I felt like his project manager. The loneliness was the worst part. It was like a constant, low hum in the background of my life. It was there when I woke up in our too-big bed, and when I came home from work to a dark, quiet apartment. To fill the silence, I started playing this stupid city-building game on my phone. It was just a way to pass the time, to turn my brain off for a few hours. The game had a global chat feature, and that's where I met him. I'm not even going to use his name because he isn't the point. He was just a guy from another country who happened to be online when I was. It started with tips about the game, but soon we were just talking. He'd ask about my day, and he would actually listen to the answer. He thought my wedding planning stories were funny, not boring. He made me laugh. He was just there. He was present in a way Mark hadn't been for a year. It wasn't some magical whirlwind romance. It was just a conversation. It was a lifeline. I felt like I had been holding my breath for a year, and he was the first person who told me it was okay to breathe. The realization that my relationship with Mark was over didn't come in one big moment. It was a slow, painful death. The final straw was when I called him excited because I thought I'd found the perfect band for the wedding. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Babe, I can't talk about this right now. I'm swamped. Just pick whichever one you think is best. I trust you." He thought he was empowering me. But what I heard was, "I don't care." I ended things a week later over the phone. It was awful. I tried to explain the distance, the loneliness, how I felt like we were just business partners managing a long-distance project called Our Future. I told him I'd connected with someone else, someone who actually saw me. Of course, all he heard was that I was leaving him for a guy I met in a game. He called me delusional. He said I was throwing away 6 years for a fantasy. Maybe he was right. But our relationship already felt like a fantasy. The only difference was my new one didn't make me feel so alone. After we hung up, I just sat there numb. Then I remembered the account. Our joint wedding savings account. I logged in, my hands shaking. The balance was a little over $6, $200. I looked at that number and I didn't see the money he'd worked so hard for. I saw my time. I saw every single night. I cried myself to sleep. Every dinner I ate alone. Every time I had to answer the question, "So when's the big day?" with a fake smile. I saw the 6 years of my life I'd poured into a future that had just vanished. In that moment, something inside me just snapped. He had his new career, his new life. He was moving forward. What was I left with? An empty apartment and a wedding binder full of broken promises. The money felt like the only tangible thing I had left from our relationship. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about worth. He thought a few monthly transfers into an account made up for his absence. I felt like I was owed for the emotional labor for being the one who kept our dream alive long after he'd outsourced it to me. It was my severance pay. That's what I told myself. A payment for 6 years of my life. I transferred the entire amount to my personal account. The screen flashed "Success." And for a second I felt nothing. Then a wave of panic and regret washed over me so strong it made me sick. I knew what I had done. I knew it was wrong. But it was done. His text started a few hours later. First confusion, then pure rage. He called me a thief. A liar. He said he was going to destroy me. I blocked his number, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the next day in a daze, alternating between crying and feeling this horrible, defiant anger. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew it wouldn't be pretty. This morning my phone rang. It wasn't him. It was my dad. His voice was quiet, the way it gets when he's not just angry but deeply, truly disappointed. "We need to talk," he said. "Mark called me. He told me everything." My stomach dropped. "He told you everything?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Of course he had. He'd told my father times, his times, everything. "Get dressed. You're coming over to the house now," he said, and hung up. There was no room for argument. The drive to my parents' house was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I rehearsed what I would say. I would explain the loneliness, the year of feeling like a ghost in my own life. I would talk about the emotional labor, the wedding I planned alone. I wouldn't try to excuse taking the money, but I would give it context. I thought I was going to have a difficult conversation with my dad. What I walked into was an ambush. I opened the front door and saw them all sitting in the living room like a jury. My dad in his armchair, my mom on the edge of the sofa, looking terrified. And across from them, Mark. He wasn't alone. He'd brought his parents. They all looked up at me as I walked in their faces, a mixture of stone-cold anger and pity. I felt like a child who had been called to the principal's office. The air was so thick with tension I could barely breathe. My dad just pointed to the empty chair next to my mom. "Sit down." Mark's father started, but my mom cut him off. "Mark, what she did was wrong," she began, her voice shaking, but trying to be strong. "But you have to understand what she's been through. She has been so lonely this past year. Planning a wedding by yourself while you were busy. It takes a toll. She felt abandoned. It was the wrong thing to say. I could see it on their faces." Mark's mother scoffed quietly. To them, my mom's words didn't sound like an explanation. They sounded like a childish excuse. It just made me look spoiled and weak, as if loneliness was a good enough reason to steal thousands of dollars. My mom was trying to defend me, but she was just digging a deeper hole for us both. Mark held up a hand, calm and collected. He was in his element. This was a business negotiation now. "I understand you're upset," he said, "not to me, but to my father. I am too. We can talk about feelings later. Right now, I just want to resolve the issue of the money." He pulled out a folder. Inside were neatly printed bank statements. He had highlighted every single transfer he'd made into the wedding account since we opened it. He had dates, amounts, everything. Cold, hard facts. He wasn't there to talk about the 6 years we spent together. He wasn't there to understand why I was heartbroken. He was there to collect a debt. "My total contribution to that account," he said, his voice flat and even, "was $4,823. The rest was from her contributions and a little bit of interest." He passed the statements to my father. My dad, a man who understands numbers better than he understands emotions, studied them for a long moment. I watched my entire 6-year relationship get reduced to a ledger sheet in my father's hands. Every sacrifice I'd made, every tear I'd cried, every lonely night erased. All that mattered were the numbers on that page. Mark even took out his phone. "You can log into my bank app on your phone if you want to verify it yourself, sir." It was the ultimate humiliation, proving my theft to my own father on his own phone. My dad didn't even look at me. He just nodded slowly and handed the papers back to Mark. "She'll pay you back," he said. "All of it. The $4,800. He couldn't even say the full number. "I'll work out a payment plan with her. You'll get your money." And that was it. Case closed. The tribunal had reached its verdict. Mark had won. He had proven I was a thief, and in doing so, he had completely ignored the reason I'd done it. My family saw it too. They didn't see a woman who had been driven to a desperate, stupid act by a year of emotional neglect. They just saw the numbers. They saw the crime. Mark and his parents left shortly after that. There were no goodbyes. The car ride home with my parents was silent. It was a horrible, heavy silence, worse than any shouting match could ever be. When we got to my apartment, my dad turned off the car, but didn't make a move to get out. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he said, staring straight ahead at the windshield. "We didn't raise you to be a thief." "Dad, please," I begged, tears finally streaming down my face. It wasn't about the money. He left me. He was gone for a year, and he just expected me to wait and plan a party. "I don't want to hear it," he cut me off. "You can feel however you want to feel. It doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed your mother. You embarrassed yourself." I was left with nothing to say. He was right about the act, but so wrong about the cause. He had agreed to a payment plan. He would pay Mark directly every month, and I would pay him back. I was a 8-year-old woman, put on an allowance by her father to pay back the man I was supposed to marry. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. My relationship with my parents is strained. We talk, but it's different. There's a wall of disappointment between us that I don't know how to break down. They look at me and see a liability, a problem they had to solve. And the online guy, it faded just as Mark said it would. Once real life came crashing down, the fantasy of our little online world couldn't hold up. We stopped talking a few weeks after the intervention. He was a symptom of my loneliness, a temporary fix for a much bigger problem. He was never the point. The point was the emptiness Mark left behind. I know I was wrong. I know taking the money was a stupid, impulsive, and illegal thing to do. I live with that regret every single day. I'm paying the money back. And I'm paying for my mistake in a dozen other ways too. But I'm not the villain he painted me as. I'm not a cold, calculating thief. I'm just the woman who spent 6 years building a future with a man only to be told that my time, my effort, and my heart weren't worth as much as the numbers on his bank statement. He took my future, so I took the money. We both know we can never get either of them back.
Story 11.
My husband has left me. My own daughter won't speak to me. They're all over there at her house, probably talking about what a monster I am. And I know if you're reading this, you'll probably agree with them. But you don't know my girls. You don't know my family. I'm the one who built it. And I'm the only one who seems to remember that a family is supposed to take care of its own. I have 2 daughters, and they couldn't be more different. My eldest, the one who is causing all this trouble, has always been the strong one. She's like a tank. Whatever she wants, she gets. A good husband, a nice house, a career she could just drop without a second thought. And kids. My God, the kids. 4 of them. She just pops them out one after the other like it's nothing. She makes it all look so easy, and I think she's forgotten that for some people it's not. My youngest, my baby, is different. She has a softer heart. The world bruises her more easily. She's had to fight for everything, for her grades in school, for jobs, for relationships. I've always had to watch over her, to be her shield. It's a mother's job to see where things aren't fair and to try and make them right. And life has never been fair to my youngest. The day she called me about the doctor's appointment was the worst day of my life. I heard a sound on the phone I hadn't heard since she was a little girl who'd fallen off her bike. That raw, hopeless sob. The doctor had told her it was over. She was infertile. The word itself is ugly. Final. All her dreams of a family, of a baby to hold, just gone. It felt like a part of me had been declared barren, too. I looked at my life, at my 2 girls, and all I could see was this terrible imbalance. One daughter's house was so full of life it was bursting, while my other daughter was facing a future that was just empty. A quiet house. A lonely life. It was wrong. A cosmic mistake. And I knew right then that it was my job to fix it. The solution was right there inside our own family. It was so simple, so perfect. My eldest, for all her faults, is a wonderful mother. Pregnancy suits her. She glows. It's a gift, a talent her body has. So I helped my youngest find the words. I coached her. This wasn't some huge, awful thing to ask. It wasn't like asking for a lung. It was asking her to use her gift, the one she had in abundance, to help her own sister, to give her a chance at the happiness that came so easily to her. We knew she'd had a difficult time with her last baby. Honestly, it sounded like a lot of drama to me. She complained about bed rest and high blood pressure, but at the end of the day, she was fine and the baby was fine. That's what matters. The past is the past. A few uncomfortable months in exchange for a lifetime of joy for her sister. It seemed like such a small price to pay. Her no was like a door slamming in our faces. It was so fast, so cold. There was no hesitation. She didn't even pretend to think about it. She started talking about risks, about her health, about how she needed to be there for the 4 children she already had, as if we were asking her to sacrifice herself. It's just a pregnancy. Her body is literally built for it. I could hear my youngest's breath catch on the phone, her hope just shattering. The pain twisted into anger. Of course, she screamed at her. She was wounded. But my eldest, sitting there in her perfect house with her perfect family, couldn't see past her own selfishness. She was hoarding her good fortune, keeping it all for herself. So my youngest posted on Facebook. I know people will judge her for that, but they don't understand. It wasn't an attack. It was a cry for help. A desperate plea from a woman whose heart had just been broken by the one person in the world who could fix it. She wanted the family to see what was happening, to understand her pain. She felt alone and she reached out. And what did my perfect, strong eldest daughter do? She responded with her own post. But hers wasn't a cry of pain. It was a weapon, She laid out all these private medical details, twisting the story to make herself look like a fragile victim and her sister like some kind of monster for even asking. She hid behind doctor's orders to justify her selfishness, and she did it in public. She invited strangers into our family's most private moments just so she could get a few hundred likes and have everyone tell her how right she was. It was cruel, and it was designed to humiliate her sister. I knew I had to step in. I called her and asked her to lunch. Just us, mother and daughter. This needed to be handled inside the family, not on the internet. When we sat down, I tried to make her understand. I brought her into this world. Her body, her health, it's not just hers. It's part of the family I built. Her first duty is to that family, to her blood. She didn't get it. She started talking about the risks again, about how her kids could be left without a mother. It was such melodrama. I finally had to be blunt. They will live, I told her. Children are strong. They adapt. They would have their father, their aunt, their grandparents. But your sister, the pain of not having a child, is a hole that never ever gets filled. You are asking her to suffer for a lifetime, so you can avoid a little risk and a few months of being uncomfortable. She just stared at me, her face pale. Then she stood up, threw her napkin on the table, and walked out without another word, like a teenager throwing a tantrum. I sat there alone in the restaurant, just shaking my head. She didn't understand her duty. She didn't understand love. That evening, the silence in our house was heavier than I'd ever known it to be. My husband, her father, came home late. I knew he'd spoken to her. I could see it on his face, that hard, disappointed look he gets when he thinks he's right about something. He didn't even ask about my day. He just stood in the living room doorway, arms crossed, and said, "You need to stop this." Just like that. Stop this. As if I were a child playing a game. As if the gaping wound in our family was something I had created instead of something I was desperately trying to heal. I was just trying to talk to her, I said, keeping my voice even. I was trying to make her see her sister's pain by telling her that her own children would be fine without her, he shot back. His voice was rising. What in God's name is wrong with you? Did you even hear what you just said? Of course I heard it. It was a hard truth, but it was the truth. Children are survivors. My eldest daughter's children have a father, a big house, money, everything they could ever need. They would be sad, of course, but they would be okay. My youngest daughter has a hole in her life that can never be filled. How could he not see the difference? You've never understood, I told him, and my own voice started to shake. You see everything in black and white. Right and wrong. You don't understand the bond between them, the connection a mother has. I am trying to keep this family whole. And all you can do is take her side. Her side, he laughed a bitter, ugly sound. She's not asking for a side. She's asking to be allowed to live her life. The doctors told her it was dangerous. This isn't a game. You are pushing her to risk her life because you've decided her sister deserves a baby more. He stepped closer, his face all tight with anger. You've always done this. coddled the youngest. "She's your golden child, and you'll burn down everything around her just to make sure she's happy." Golden child. That's what he called my poor broken girl. The one who has struggled for everything while her sisters sailed through life. It was so unfair, so cruel. I was not coddling our most wounded child. I was trying to save her. "You're a monster," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That word again. The word they were all probably using at my daughter's house. "You're acting like a monster." That broke me. For 40 years, this man had been my partner. He'd seen me raise our girls, bandage their knees, sit through their school plays, hold them when their hearts were broken, and now he stood in our living room and called me a monster. All because I was trying to do what a mother does, fix things for her children. "Get out," I whispered back. I didn't even know I was going to say it until it was out. He just stared at me for a long moment. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, turned around, and went upstairs. I heard the closet door open. I heard a suitcase zip shut. He walked back down the stairs, bag in hand, and didn't even look at me as he went to the door. "I'm going to my daughter's," he said, his hand on the knob. "The one who needs her father right now." And then he was gone. He left our home, our marriage, to go comfort the daughter who already has everything, leaving me all alone to pick up the pieces with the daughter who has nothing. The days since then have been the longest of my life. The house is empty. My youngest calls me a dozen times a day, crying. She feels so alone, so attacked. I'm the only one she has left. I try to be strong for her, to tell her that we'll get through this, but my own heart feels like it's been ripped out. My husband is still there. My eldest daughter posts pictures on Facebook. Pictures of him playing with his grandchildren. Pictures of them all having a family dinner, smiling. They look so happy, like a perfect little family that has cut out the sickness. They've made me the sickness. They're all huddled together in their fortress of righteousness, pointing their fingers at me. The manipulative mother. The monster. But they don't see what I see. I see one daughter blessed with so much she can't even see how rich she is, and another daughter starving for just a small piece of that happiness. I see a family with a cure for its own illness right inside of it, but one member is selfishly hoarding the medicine. They say I'm the one who divided this family, but I was the only one brave enough to try and make it whole. I was the only one who saw the imbalance and tried to fix it. They can call me a villain. They can post their happy pictures and pretend I don't exist. But a mother knows. A family is a body, and when one part is sick, the other parts have to help it heal. That's not monstrous. That's love. It's a fierce, painful, difficult love that people like my husband and my eldest daughter are too weak to understand. And I will stand by my youngest daughter, my baby, until the very end, because that is my duty. That is my love.
Story 12.
I know what she's telling everyone. I know what she's told him, that I'm the crazy, obsessed wife of his best friend, that I'm trying to break them up, that I'm in love with him. I can almost hear the words coming out of her mouth, all reasonable and calm, making me sound like a monster. And I guess if you only see the little pieces she wants you to see, maybe I do look like one. But you're not seeing the whole picture. You're not seeing what my life was like before she came along and decided I was the villain in her story. My marriage to John is a business arrangement at this point. We live in the same house, we sleep in the same bed, and we go to fertility appointments together. Like we're partners working on a very stressful, very expensive project. The project is fix our broken marriage with a baby. It's not working. We both know it's not. We broke this thing years ago. He cheated, then I cheated. It was an ugly, quiet war that ended in a truce because we were too tired to keep fighting and too scared to leave. So we stay. We haunt this big, empty house and pretend that a positive pregnancy test will somehow make us love each other again. In all of that mess, there was Alex, my husband's best friend. And know before you even think it, it was never like that. Not once. He wasn't a shoulder to cry on, so I could make a move. He was my person. My brother. When John was out all night, and I knew exactly where he was, Alex would come over with a pizza, and we'd watch stupid action movies until I fell asleep on the couch. He listened to me cry about John's affair, without ever saying, "I told you so." And he was the only person on earth who I told about my own affair, and he didn't judge me. He just sat with me in the wreckage. We had our own language, our own jokes. The whole sexy and good-looking thing in text, that was a running gag that started years ago, way before her. Our friend group always joked about how ridiculously good-looking he was, and it became my dumb way of teasing him. It was never serious. It was just us. Easy. Comfortable. The picture she probably found on his phone, yeah, I know the one. It was from my birthday 2 years ago. We were all drunk. Someone dared me to do something stupid for a photo, and I did. It was a dumb, meaningless picture from a time when we could still be dumb and meaningless. He was my safe place. The one part of my life that didn't feel like a complete and utter failure. And then he met her. The first time I met her was at a barbecue at our house. John and I were in the middle of a bad week. Another negative test, another silent, tense dinner. I was not in the mood for company, but Alex was so excited for us to meet her. The second she walked in, I felt it. This cold, assessing look. She wasn't looking at me like a person. She was looking at me like a specimen. She's a few years older, and she has this whole I have my life together vibe that she wears like armor. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her questions felt like a test. So, what do you do? How long have you and John been married? Do you guys live far from your families? It wasn't conversation. It was data collection. I could feel her filing away the information, judging my messy life, my tense marriage, my very existence. She was sizing me up, deciding if I was a threat. I could see the label she was putting on me, the troubled best friend's wife. So I shut down. I gave one-word answers. I didn't engage. If she was going to put me in a box, I wasn't going to help her decorate it. I built a wall right then and there because I just knew she was here to take him away from me. I saw it happen slowly at first. Alex started answering my texts less. He'd make excuses when I asked him to hang out. When we were all together, he was more reserved, more careful. I could feel her watching us, analyzing our every interaction. The easy, goofy way we used to be was gone. He was being sanitized, cleaned up for his new perfect life with his new perfect girlfriend. The messy friends were being phased out. Panic set in. It was a low, constant hum of anxiety. I was losing him. I was losing my only anchor. So I did something stupid. I found an article online, some stupid pop psychology thing, about why some relationships are built to fail. I sent it to him. It wasn't meant to be some evil, manipulative move. It was a desperate, clumsy SOS. It was my way of saying, "Are you sure? Look what she's doing to you. She's pulling you away from everything you know." It was a cry for help. I just wanted my friend back. Of course, it only made things worse. He was polite but distant. He was clearly annoyed. I had crossed a line. And that made me even more desperate. A few weeks later, we all went out to a club for another friend's birthday. The music was loud, the air was thick, and I could feel the space between me and Alex more than ever. He and she were a unit, a little island of two, and I was just floating nearby. At one point, she went outside to take a phone call. I saw my chance. I just wanted a moment, just a second, of how things used to be. I walked over to him at the bar, put my arm around his waist, and just leaned my head on his shoulder. He seemed surprised, but didn't pull away. I felt a tiny bit of relief. He's still in there, I thought. My Alex is still in there. I reached up and stroked his beard, something I'd done 100 times before when I was teasing him. It was a sisterly, familiar touch. I was clinging to it to him, to that last little bit of our friendship. I miss this, I said, my voice barely audible over the music. I miss you. He didn't answer. He just looked down into his drink. I kept my hand there on his chest, a silent plea. Don't let her take you away. Please don't leave me alone. I didn't see her come back inside. I didn't notice her until she was standing right there, her face a perfect mask of polite fury. Her eyes weren't looking at him. They were locked directly on my hand. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. The music was still thumping, people were still laughing, but the air around the three of us went completely still and cold. She didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She just gave Alex this look. A calm, disappointed look that said, "Time, see, I told you so." Asterisk. She turned and walked away. And he followed her. He didn't say a word to me. Didn't even glance in my direction. He just followed her right out of the club, leaving me standing there by the bar, feeling like the stupidest, most pathetic person in the world. The next 2 days were torture. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for it to buzz with a text from him, either angry or confused or something. But there was nothing. Just silence. It was worse than him yelling. The silence felt like he was erasing me, like our years of friendship were just being quietly deleted. I knew a conversation was coming. I was just dreading what it would be. He finally called on Tuesday afternoon. John was at work. I was sitting on the kitchen counter, staring at a calendar of doctor's appointments. His voice on the phone was a stranger's voice. It was flat formal. "Hey! Can I come over for a few minutes? We need to talk." When he walked in, he didn't give me the usual goofy hug. He just stood awkwardly in the foyer. He wouldn't look me in the eye. We sat on the living room couches, facing each other across the coffee table like we were in a therapy session. The same couch where he'd held my hand while I cried about John. The same room where we'd laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. Now it felt like a courtroom and I was on trial. So he started looking at his hands. "We need to talk about what happened at the club." "Alex, it was nothing," I said immediately, my voice sounding desperate even to me. "You know how we are." "I was just messing around." "It's not nothing to her, Jane," he said, and the way he said her name felt like a shield he was holding up between us. "She was really hurt. She feels like you're constantly disrespecting our relationship." He started listing my crimes. The cold shoulder I gave her at the barbecue. The article. The texts where I called him sexy. He even brought up the old cleavage picture, saying she found it, and that it was inappropriate for him to have. Each thing he listed felt like a brick being added to the wall between us. He was taking every piece of our history, every inside joke, every moment of our friendship, and twisting it into evidence for her case against me. He was rewriting our story through her lens. "That's not fair," I finally burst out. "You know that's not what any of that was. That was just us, before her. You can't just change the past because she doesn't like it." "But it's not before her anymore," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's now. And it makes her uncomfortable. It makes times uncomfortable." That was the line that broke me. Asterisk. It makes me uncomfortable. Asterisk. Him. My. Alex. The person who sat with me through the absolute ugliest parts of my life was now uncomfortable with me. Because of her. The rage and the grief and the terror of being left all alone just boiled over. "Uncomfortable. You want to talk about uncomfortable," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm drowning here, Alex. I'm injecting myself with hormones every single day, praying for a baby to fix a marriage that's already dead. I feel like a complete failure. And I had to listen to you tell me in confidence about how she just so casually got rid of hers. I heard the story about her abortion. So yeah, maybe I don't like her. Maybe it's hard for me to watch you throw away our friendship for someone who could just make a choice like that, when it's a choice I would kill for." It was a horrible, cruel thing to say. I knew it the second the words left my mouth. It was a low blow aimed to hurt because I was hurting so badly. I wanted to claw the words back out of the air. His face changed. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger I had never ever seen from him before. He stood up. "I can't believe you just said that," he said, his voice dangerously low. I told you that because I trusted you. Because I thought you were my friend. I am your friend, I cried, standing up too. She's the one who's changing everything. No, Jane. You are, he said, shaking his head. He looked at me like he didn't even know who I was anymore. This is exactly what she was worried about. You're right. We do need to establish some boundaries. Boundaries. The word felt so corporate, so final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut and being locked forever. He was drawing a line in the sand, and I was on one side, and he and she were on the other. He walked to the door and left. He didn't look back this time either. That was a month ago. I see him sometimes when our whole friend group gets together. It's excruciating. The easy banter is gone. The inside jokes are gone. All that's left is a polite, stiff distance. He's cordial. He asks how I am, how John is. But his eyes are empty. He looks through me, not at me. He and she are a fortress. They arrive together, they leave together, and there's no getting in. She won. She did it. She successfully painted me as the obsessive, jealous homewrecker. She isolated him, and in doing so, she isolated me. Now my life is just this house, this ghost of a marriage, and the endless crushing appointments. The one person who made it all bearable now looks at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. She didn't just take my friend. She took my entire support system. And now I am completely, utterly alone.